Mr. Clerk, are we ready to start?
Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me?
I can. Are you ready?
Chair Krantz, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. There we go. Looks like everybody's connected, sir.
All right, very good. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for May 20, 2021 at 2:01. And I will ask Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, to call the roll.
Yes, sir. Board Member Sanchez,
Here.
Board Chair Krantz,
Here.
Board Member Contreras,
Present.
Board Member McNamara,
Here.
Board Member Desmond,
Here.
Board Alternate Gasserlin,
Present.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Present.
Board Member Jenkins,
Here.
Board Member Bapatal,
Here.
Board Member Von Wilpert. She informed me she will not be on.
Okay, thank you. And if you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we will now have a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures for those people there at the dungeon in Oceanside.
Thank you, sir. In the event of an emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms located on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Thank you. And Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, sir. There was a change to agenda item 16. The updated materials were sent to the board. I'll be posting to the public right after this meeting. Agenda item 16, authorize the executive director to execute task order agreement number 5 to agreement number 19057 with Civil Pros, a DBA of Rail Pros Holdings for Delmar Bluffs right-of-way fencing, mapping, and as-needed surveying, design, and design support. No substantive changes were made to the staff recommendation for agenda item 16. The staff report was revised to attach the scope of work for request of statements of qualifications, number 30269, and the FY20 and FY21 board approved constrained capital improvement program projects, which specifies fencing construction and plans, specifications and estimates, PSNE, and to make clear that the proposed action is not for engineering services or fencing, mapping, and as-needed surveys, design, and design support, not for the construction of fencing. Construction of fencing is intended to be brought at a later date for board consideration.
Okay, thank you. And Anthony, do we have any public comments not related to an agenda item?
No, sir. All public comments are for agenda item 16, which I will note during that time.
Okay, very good. So we're going to keep using the Zoom process where if you want to speak, you would raise your hand in the Zoom and we will try and get to everybody's questions and however many you have. It's going to be, there's a lot of information today, so we'll do our best to keep things moving along. And with that, moving on, we have the minutes for the regular board meeting of April 22, 2021 and consent items 1 through 15. And I'd entertain a motion for approval of this these combined 2 items.
Move approval of those 2 combined items.
Second. Desmond.
Thank you. On the combined motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Jim Desmond to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on April 22nd, 2021 and consent items 1 through 15. Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Alternate Gasterland.
I've reviewed the minutes with Representative Quirk. Aye.
Thank you, ma'am. Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara,
Aye.
Board Member Sanchez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Aye.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to other business items 16 and 17. And for the first of these, we will review item 16, and Tracy Foster, the Chief Development Officer, will run us through this item.
Board Chair Krantz, this is Lori Winfrey, General Counsel for NCTD. I did want to just make one statement on the record for the benefit of all board members. It has come to my attention over the course of the last day or so that there's been several board members that have communicated about this agenda item prior to the meeting today. And I just want to note for the record that those types of communications need to be managed. And I would advise any board member that has communicated in a serial manner to make that known and disclosed from the dais today.
Okay, thank you. Tracy?
Okay, we're good to go here. So good afternoon. This agenda item seeks approval for supplemental engineering work related to fencing along the Delmar Bluffs. And before we get into the scope of work, I just want to review some information to bring everyone up to speed. So you will recall that back in June of 2020, NCTD completed a trespasser risk reduction analysis through its contractor WSP, and that was reviewed with the board of directors in November. The report itself identified three and focused in on three areas in Oceanside, Encinitas, as well as Del Mar, and recommended that physical barriers be installed, such as fencing. Various forms of public outreach were performed as a result of the trespasser study, including a robust webpage on NCTD's site that included the study itself, frequently asked questions, historical documents, and information also on the STB petition. Also, a presentation was given by our contractor WSP and our Chief of Safety, Sean Loofborough, to the City of Del Mar in January of this year. In response to the trespasser study, the City of Del Mar had a number of questions for NCTD and specific requests relating to requests for engineering support work, such as surveys, engineering designs, and information on view impacts. Okay, a little bit of an update on the Surface Transportation Board. So in December of 2020, the City of Del Mar, the California Coastal Commission, and NCTD entered into a settlement discussions agreement related to Surface Transportation Board Finance Docket number 36433. This settlement discussions agreement intended to provide a framework for confidential and productive discussions amongst the parties. It also contemplated that NCTD would not award any contract for construction of fencing or commence any construction of fencing in the City of Del Mar, and that the City of Del Mar and the California Coastal Commission would not pursue any legal or other remedies during this discussion period. That agreement was in place through March 30th of 2021. And in support of good faith discussions and potential resolution, this agreement was extended, as well as the stay of the STB matter to the end of the year.
So Board Chair Kranz, I want to just make clear to everyone today as it relates to this confidentiality agreement. The parties did sign this agreement and it is informing the transaction here today in terms of what can be disclosed as it relates to this action item. I would just state that the item is being brought forth today in an effort to further those collaborative discussions post this meeting here today.
So continuing on, our resolution efforts, a working group was established amongst representatives of the City of Del Mar, California Coastal Commission, and NCTD. We've been having regular meetings. We've also conducted a few site walks and received a letter of support for this engineering work from the California Coastal Commission. NCTD did not receive a letter of support from the City of Del Mar, but the city had previously stated its priorities in addressing these issues. This was stated at a November 23rd meeting. And this proposed scope of work will support the City of Del Mar's priorities. And as you heard from Mayor Gasterlin at the January 2021 board meeting, we need effective safety solutions that work for all stakeholders. This engineering work will support looking at the fencing for all of the stakeholders. Additionally on this are the other requests for engineering work that I previously had mentioned, and these requests came from the City of Del Mar. So on to what is this scope of work and what does it include? The scope of work provides for mapped images of fencing. It also will include a view shed analysis with rendered elevation modeling at various viewpoints. Optional tasks included in this scope of work include right-of-way surveying, preparation of fencing plans, specifications, and estimates, bid support, and post-award design support. The fiscal impact of this proposed contract action is $388,000, and we are still working on the negotiations of price for this contract action. But the project itself and the funding for this was approved by the Board of Directors in fiscal year 2021 and upcoming 22. There's funding included. Oops, sorry. Okay. This is just a picture identified from our capital improvement program that was approved. And so some key considerations, the city of, the supplemental analysis is not required to construct the fencing. So all of the engineering work and the scope of work that I provided to you is not necessary in order for NCTD to construct the actual fencing, but it will provide clarity and information regarding the specific details of the fencing and also demonstrates NCTD's good faith efforts to address public feedback to date as to the location and the type of fencing contemplated. So our next steps are to complete the mapping with elevation modeling, the property boundaries and view shed analysis. We anticipate a draft report in August, although we are working diligently to have that completed by mid-July. Also, the final report would then be due in October. And again, if we can speed up the draft, we will certainly speed up the final report. Also, we will have our continued efforts with the working group for resolution by December 31st. So the staff recommendation is to authorize the executive director to execute task order agreement number 5 to agreement number 19057 with Civil Pros for Del Mar Bluffs right-of-way fencing mapping and as-needed survey, design, and design support in an amount not to exceed $388,000, subject to successful negotiations and with concurrence of general counsel. Questions?
Okay, thank you. Before we get into questions, Anthony, could you give us the information you received regarding public oral communication on this particular matter?
Yes, sir. I'll play the telephonic communications. Before I do that, we did receive 167 written public comments. Those were provided to the board and posted on the district's website for public inspection. 163 of those comments were against fencing in Del Mar. 3 of those comments were in favor of fencing in Del Mar, and 1 just suggested a change in fencing type from chain link to cable and post. I will play the telephonic comment now.
My name is Laura DeMarco from Del Mar, and the reason I am calling in is about item 16, the proposed engineering study for the Del Mar Bluff Fence project needs to include geological, seismic, wildfire, and biological impacts. Those impacts will show you that this is not a good idea. This 1.4-mile fence that is supposed to be designed for safety is actually dangerous as it undermines the stability of the train track bed, increases bluff slides, and threatens the lives of the train passengers and crews who are charged to protect. No geologist would ever approve a fence whose installation requires drilling 1,400 fence post holes that are 2 to 3 feet deep into the fragile sandstone bluffs, especially near the edge of the most vulnerable ocean side, as it creates more sources of water intrusion that create bluff slides. This geologic hazard is exacerbated by increasing sea level rise and the nearby Rose Canyon fault that seismic experts estimate could generate earthquakes of 6.2 to 7.0 on the Richter scale. Here are some of the many dangerous reasons why this safety fence is so dangerous. Number 1, it endangers train passengers as it accelerates the deterioration of Del Mar's fragile bluffs. Number 2, it causes bluff slides that endanger those on the beach below. Does NCDD want to be responsible for a bluff failure tragedy like the one most recently in Encinitas that killed 3 family members when a section of the sandstone bluff crushed them? Number 3, a 1.4-mile long fence blocks evacuees fleeing to the safety of the beach during a wildfire that threatens over 8,000 residents in Del Mar, Del Mar Heights, and Del Mar Terrace. Simulation models show that it takes less than 45 minutes for a wildfire to fully engulf our tree-lined streets and flammable wooden homes as it sweeps from brush-filled Crest Canyon, Torrey Pines Preserve, and Anderson Canyon to the ocean during high Santa Ana wind conditions. This could block major evacuation routes on Del Mar Heights Road and Camino Del Mar, so evacuees need to be able to flee on foot to the safety of the beach below. Number 4, fencing both sides of the tracks along the bluff creates a 1.4-mile long death trap for people, pets, and wildlife from oncoming trains, as there's no ability to block its south entrance by the Torrey Pines Bridge or the northern one by Coast Boulevard. In summary, there are better ways to improve railroad safety than the proposed 1.4-mile long fencing project that accelerates the instability of the bluffs, shortens the useful life of the track bed, blocks evacuees from wildfire, endangers people on the train on the beach below from bluff slides, and creates a death trap between the fences and generates significant liability from a catastrophic event that could kill and injure hundreds of people. Thank you.
That concludes the public comment, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Before I get into board member questions, I did want to ask Tracy to flip back to slide number 16 because I want to be sure I understand that this analysis is not required to construct the fencing, but will assist the board in considering future actions related to the proposed fencing. And essentially what this is is a part of NCTD's good faith efforts to address public feedback to date related to location and type of fencing contemplated and to provide a view shed analysis. So yeah, it seems pretty clear with regard to there's no requirement. Matt, can you speak to that particular issue? There's no requirement for this analysis?
Yes, so there is no requirement for this analysis. I think as documented in this presentation, the analysis that was being proposed today is very consistent with the analysis that Mary Gastelum requested in her presentation to the board in January, very consistent with the email communications and letters that I received from the city of Del Mar. This stuff, its analysis, as you stated, is not required for us to be able to install the fencing, but it will help the board and I think the general public understand the exact nature of the fencing project and validate, I think, that we have taken significant steps forward towards making sure that the proposed fencing is well designed in a context sensitive manner.
Thank you. And, you know, I know that the collaboration meetings have been confidential and they're subject to an agreement that the three parties came to, but I did notice that on slide 4, the letter from the Coastal Commission showing their support for this agenda item indicates that one of the three parties is speaking out and offering that support. And I didn't see anything from the city of Del Mar, and I'm wondering, Board Member Gastelum has, you know, I don't need to know what you guys have been discussing confidentially, but is there willingness on the part of the city council in Del Mar to offer a letter of support? Board Member Gastelum? Well, she is not available right now, but I would.
So I'm
as-
unmuted now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, my internet has at an inopportune time vanished. So unfortunately, I did not hear the public comments and I don't know what was just said. Could you just please bring me up to speed, Chair Krantz?
I was pointing out that the Coastal Commission has offered a letter of support for this action item to have this study done. And I'm wondering if Del Mar is prepared to support, as a city council, this action.
All right. The material for this item was sent to the City of Del Mar's NCTD representative, Dan Quirk, on May 18th, Tuesday at 5 p.m. That was less than 2 days ago and one day after the City Council met in closed session on the item. We have not had an opportunity to review the materials. What was missing at the time is a clearly defined scope of work with tasks and goals, the request for qualifications, the agreement text, line item budget for the $388,000 request. So I would like to make a motion to continue this item to a future NCTD board meeting.
Okay, hearing no second, we will continue.
Excuse me, I'll second that motion.
All right, so let's see. I will call on the folks who have raised their hands. We have a motion and a second on the table, and let's have a little discussion about that. Board Member Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. I got a couple of questions and then a comment, but I guess first I have a statement. I want to disclose that I had a telephone conversation with board member Quirk on this last night. I realize he's not here today representing Del Mar, but I just wanted to disclose I did have that conversation. And I got a question for this study. Is this going to look at different types of fencing or potential kinds of fencing, or only one kind of fencing? Matt, what's the, I guess, the scope there?
Okay, so we have to walk a fine line in terms of the confidential negotiations that are occurring. But in general, all of those matters are being looked at. Different types of fences, heights of fences, and view shed impact analysis. So one of the things, for clarity, because I feel like as the executive director, I probably will speak a little bit more freely. And if you guys see the general counsel knocking me out, you'll know why. The proposal has evolved significantly from where we started in terms of the fencing project. It's important to note that, again, this is confidential negotiations working in, hopefully in a good faith way, to come to a successful agreement that would obviate action from the Surface Transportation Board. So in large part, in answer to your question, yes, all of those things are being looked at towards ensuring a context-sensitive implementation fencing.
Okay, so there is. And then I know this was, I understand that the time period for these discussions has been extended now until December 31st. So does that mean there's no lawsuits and there's going to be no construction until December 31st? Is that pretty much what is encompassed by that extension?
Yes. Yeah. So we agreed to an additional extension to December 31st. At the time that we agreed to it, both the Coastal Commission and the City of Del Mar indicated that we would be able to resolve the issues within this time frame. The reason that this is on this agenda is because the request from our partners was to have this information available so that each of the parties would be able to respectfully go back to their policymaking boards and be able to share details of the plan. It also supports the public being aware of the details of the plan before there's a board action. And again, Board Member Desmond, is just similar to what Board Chair Krantz has stated. This is not essential in terms of NCTD installing a fence, but I do think it's a very important and very important information for the board, for the Coastal Commission to have, and for the City of Del Mar elected officials and residents to have.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Krantz, I know we have a motion and a second on the floor. I'm going to offer a substitute motion, and that's going to be to go ahead with the staff recommendation today. I know we have an unsafe condition, and people crossing the railroad tracks on foot is an unsafe condition. And we, as a board of NCTD, have a responsibility to make sure that we, to our best ability, minimize that unsafe condition. And we are aware we have it. So I think it's in our best interest to work with the City of Del Mar, work with the Coastal Mission, just as we're doing. But we also have to make sure that this unsafe condition, for the people we represent and the taxpayers, that we're aware of an unsafe condition. We need to do something about it. And this action today, all we're doing is, because we're hearing all of these different things from different people and just different news broadcasts, that this is actually going to help clear up, maybe for us as well as anybody else, is, okay, what's this really going to look like, or what's the potential of this looking like? So, this has been going on for a while, and we seem to be just keep kicking the can down the road. This is more information. I think this is vital information for all of us to help hopefully make good decisions. And I don't see any reason for holding it up anymore. And I think this would be actually beneficial to the City of Del Mar for them, moving forward. So I'm going to offer a substitute motion to accept staff's recommendation.
Is there a second?
Well, I believe I'm next to speak.
Well, but let's see if we have a
I'll
second.
second.
Who is the second?
Priyabat Patel.
All right. Thank you. And Board Member Sanchez.
Thank you. I actually thought that I was going to be first to be called on because I did raise my hand before. Robert's rules and all, I should have been called on before, allowing someone else to be able to make a substitute motion. First of all, I want to say I appreciate the limited information we're getting. I do respect the confidentiality of the discussions. What I'm getting from today is that the discussions with the city of Del Mar are moving along. Sounds like because of the letter from the Coastal Commission, it's in a positive direction. And it sounds like, but it does, I had raised my hand immediately because I wanted to hear from the representative from the city of Del Mar to see, okay, is this, because we did have a letter of support from the Coastal Commission, what is the position of the city of Del Mar? It sounds like what is being requested, she asked for a she asked for a continuance. She didn't say, I oppose this.
It's the way of life around here. This is how you get to the beach.
Sorry. So respecting the process, it seems to me, and you did, and information has just been provided that this has been continued to December. Materials were sent to the city of Del Mar just a couple of days ago. I think it's just respectful to give them a chance to digest that and then come up with their letter of support and or to continue this discussion. I mean, I would want that for my city. And so this is why, I mean, I was here to listen from Del Mar, getting personally 50 emails against the fencing, and then your reporting that the total is for NCTD especially has been over 100, kind of makes me want to pause, because I want everyone to feel that this is a process that considers everyone's positions. And certainly it sounds like it's a positive direction. So why wouldn't we grant a short continuance so that we have everybody on board and we continue in, it sounds like there's a really good faith discussions going on. So, I just don't get this, why we would just be saying, okay, no, this has nothing to do with the fencing. Not really. It's just something that we think is something to add it to kind of make people feel better. Apparently this is important. And so I would ask us to, just slow down a little bit, just for a little while. I mean, I don't know how long. I haven't had a chance to talk to Mayor Gasterlin to find out, how much time would you need, 2 days before, that's kind of running it pretty close, right? 2 days before, that's not even the 72 hours. So anyway, that's what I would be asking. And, I appreciate the desire to, show that we're moving forward, but I think just a little pause would be respectful and actually also productive in having us all move forward there's all this other stuff going on that, as Sandag thinks that, has agreed that we need to pull the rail tracks, off the bluffs, and there's those access issues and the safety issues, and so for me it's about, how can we do this in a way that we cross all the T's and dot all our I's. So thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Jenkins.
Thank you. Hold on here. I have some notes and comments. I guess my first is a comment that I'm glad it was clarified that about this item that we're not awarding any fencing contract, because all of the emails that I read, most of the people thought or were informed, I don't know what exactly transpired there, that, we were awarding a contracts that we were going to be installing the fence. So I'm glad that was clarified in the beginning, so people understand that we are not installing a fence with this item. I don't know if this is a question for either Matt or Lori, but a couple of the emails questioned if we have the legal right to install this fence. So question is, do we have the legal right to install this fence?
This is Lori Winfrey. I think the question being posed is one that's being litigated at this point at the Surface Transportation Board in a sense. NCTD believes that it has the authority already under the 2002 decision that we have from the Surface Transportation Board. And the most recent filing that the board authorized that was filed last August was to seek greater clarification as it related to the 2002 decision. And so I think, without getting into attorney-client privilege discussion, I would say it's NCTD's position that we do have the authority today.
Okay, thank you. And then we discussed about all the collaboration that has been going on. We talked about NCTD in itself does not need this study. And Matt, the 388,000, is that coming 100% out of NCTD's budget, or are we collaborating on that cost at all, or what?
So we are proposing that NCTD would fund it. It would be from combination of grant funds that we received and formula funding that we receive from the state and the federal government. I wanted just to add just a little bit of clarity. This recommendation that we're bringing forward was not conceived at the last minute. We have been working for months with the Coastal Commission and the Del Mar staff. I think it would be a hard thing for me not to just state for clarity that the action that I'm hearing in terms of the request today from the city to delay it will be significantly detrimental to the ongoing negotiations that we are having, because it undermines the premise of the discussions that are taking place between the working group of employees that are engaged in negotiating, trying to work through these details. So I just want to be clear that this did not come about as something last minute from NCTD. This was a collaborative effort where all of the partners requested this information. There's not a case where we ever really get into a detail of providing scopes of works and budget line items as part of making expenditures. But I think the comfort that the board should drive from this item is that if you look at the specific requests from the city of Del Mar, it is for the specific set of information that is being proposed to be provided by this agenda. The act of delaying this will mean that those elected bodies will not have that information potentially in a timely manner to support their deliberations and sharing with the public. So if we don't have that information, that will be the new argument, is that we don't have that, which was the argument that we heard more than a year ago, is that we did not have this information.
Okay, thank you. Two other questions. There were comments, numerous emails telling us that we should have better signage efforts in this area. Didn't we ramp that up recently? And that's part one. Part two is there were also a lot of comments about not only increasing our signage, but increasing our enforcement. And I thought we had done that previously, and there were some ramifications from that also.
Yes.
Can you clarify on those items?
Yes. So the answer is yes. And partly, it was even more important for us to ramp it up based upon the Bluff failure. We continue to receive feedback from the city of Del Mar with emails from time to time asking us why we are citing. And so it's, again, kind of, as I documented to the board several months ago, related to the historical context of it, is we've never really gotten support from Del Mar for the fencing or for signage or for security and enforcement. It's always a moving target. If someone would ask me for some of my most recent emails, you could see some of the feedback and requests about the security actions that have been taken, with it being primarily warnings to people to prevent people from trespassing. We've received pushback from that.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you. I'm not muted, good. I appreciate the presentation. I'll start with disclosure. I was contacted by 2 board members and had conversation with 1 board member. Specifically, I was contacted by Terry Gasterlin and by Priyabat Patel, and was not able to circle back and speak with Mayor Gasterlin, only with Priyabat Patel. I appreciate the clarification that the matter today is not to approve fencing, because I think that there has been a lot of misinformation or confusion in that regard. As was mentioned, we received quite a lot of email communication, and almost all of that email communication said no fences on the bluff. And that's not what we're here to talk about today. It's not what the item is about. So thank you for that clarification that this is approval of funding to further study not just fencing, but trying to figure out where the property lines are and whatnot. I have a question. Can items be added to the scope of work? I believe that, Mr. Tucker, that you mentioned that you're still working on negotiating with a contract for this particular set of study, and can additional items be added to the scope of work?
Potentially, yes. The question will get down to budget and timeline for that analysis being completed.
Okay, and how long maybe could items be added to the scope of work? The next 30 days, the next 45 days? Because attachment 16A Roman numeral 3 has a calendar schedule, and I wonder where that might fit into that if there were specific questions, coming from the public that we might want to address.
Well, see, and that would be problematic because that would violate the nature of the confidential negotiations. And so, again, we were trying to walk a very fine line with, we need to bring this agenda item through because per law, we have to come forward with this agenda item, get approved. This is not an item at this point that's ripe for public input. It is intended based upon the parties working collaboratively to attempt to reach a final plan that can be presented as a plan that hopefully is supported by the board and by the Coastal Commission and the city of Del Mar.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I think it's important to have this information to be able to make a decision at a later time, at least for me, with regard to fencing, which is the big issue that will come to us at some point in the future. But I've always been one who supported receiving studies and data and information, and I think that this is the effort to do that. So, thanks.
All right, and before we continue with questions on this agenda item, I would like to ask that per the general counsel's request for disclosure, we've had a couple of disclosures about conversations amongst board members, and anyone else who has disclosures regarding their conversations with board members, I would like to ask that you disclose those now. Board member Bhat Patel.
Yeah, so I've received communication from board member Gasterlin, but was unable to circle back with her. But I did speak with Vice Chair Edson.
Okay, great. Board member Jenkins?
Yes, I should have disclosed when I spoke. I had gotten a voicemail from Dan Quirk this week to talk to him, but I did not have a chance yet to call him back. And then I also had an email from him about a presentation he was going to give at the Del Mar City Council meeting this week, but again, did not circle back to have any discussion about it.
Okay, hands are raised, but if you have a disclosure, please speak Board Member Vice Chair Edson?
I also received an email from Dan Quirk regarding his presentation on that Monday's City Council meeting in Del Mar.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I speak up, Tony, Chair?
Pardon me?
Shall I disclose?
Yes.
Okay, I spoke with Esther Sanchez, board member, and with board member Karina Contreras. And I attempted to get in touch with others, but those are the only two that I was able to converse with.
Okay, thank you. And then Karina, you're up next, but maybe you're disclosing too, I guess. I don't know.
Yes, I wanted to disclose that I received a phone call and had a communication regarding this item with Mayor Gasterland. I also received the same email from board member Quirk regarding having a presentation at his city council meeting that I did not watch.
Okay, thank you. So if you have questions, you
Board
can.
Chair.
Oh, wait a minute.
Board Chair,
Board member-
I forgot to disclose that I did also receive that email from board member Quirk, but I haven't watched the presentation either.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Contreras?
I have no questions at this point.
No questions. Okay. Board Member Gasterland?
Yeah, I have no questions, but I do have a comment. Because I'm attached through my iPhone, I have a hard time with my hands, so I'll just leave it up.
You'll do what?
I cannot take my hand up or down, so there it is.
Oh, okay. So you want to comment?
I would very much value that opportunity. Okay. I would like to ask this board to vote no on the substitute motion in order to be able to wait and vote yes on the continuation. I'll lay out the reasons. The firm Civil Pros was the only firm to respond to the request for qualifications. We have not seen the request for qualifications, and we need to know what narrowed it so completely. The firm Civil Pros is an arm of Rail Pros, and their website motto is "Rail is our business." NCTD has stated that this engineering firm's retention of this consultant was requested by Del Mar. In fact, Del Mar did not request that a study be conducted by a firm that is not independent of the railroads. The firm must be independent and not just consider the railroad's interests, but also the interests of the citizens of Del Mar. As you would expect, if this were occurring in your city, part of the North County Transit District. The NCTD represented to the Surface Transport Board that it would pursue settlement negotiations in good faith. Yet there's been a pattern of late material. We're all trying hard. We're all trying very, very hard. And Matt, Executive Director Tucker, I appreciate the effort here. And I would very much like to give it a thorough evaluation so that we can have a back and forth. And Del Mar can ask for either scale down or scope or some caveats on the scope of work. I have not been able to read the scope of work. It was received 5 p.m. I don't know if the scope of work itself was received. The packet was received at 5:04 p.m. on Tuesday by Representative Dan Quirk. Questions have been asked about the Coastal Commission's letter. The Coastal Commission's letter does endorse approving the gathering of information, but it did not endorse the firm recommended to do the studies, and it took no position on the engineering firm or the selection process. Del Mar is concerned that all the parties have an opportunity to weigh in. I implore the board, let's give this the smaller amount of time we need. We know that we have till December to work together. We've laid out caveats in Del Mar, and we would very much like to have a back and forth with the executive directors and the staff. And I'll lay out my view of what those caveats need to be. Safe crossings will make a difference. The study is underway. We need to know what the results of that study are. We have from now until the end of December. Let's accelerate parts of that study and understand how they can inform this process. We need to focus on blocking access to Coast Boulevard and the south end of Powerhouse Park. That's where the problem is. That's where the vast majority, according to the safety data, of the strikes that have happened over the past 10 to 12 years have happened. Chain link fencing would be a travesty on the beautiful, fragile coastal bluffs. As we heard from one of the public comments, Laura DeMarco, 1,400 2 to 3 foot holes all along the bluff will inevitably destabilize. So we need to think hard about the effects on the coastal bluff. No chain link fencing. No fencing south of 12th Street. The bluff itself, as I showed you in January, forms a natural barrier south of 12th. Cable and post may be acceptable from Coast to 12th, and we look forward to conversations where we talk that through. That's exactly where chain link fencing would not be acceptable. On the table, no view obstruction, no blocked access to trails, and we've talked about even more signage. Where signage has not happened, increased signage, Sharon, Board Member Jenkins, is along Coast Boulevard. That's where people come in. It's an at-grade entry. We need to post people there. Posting at 5 a.m. at 7th Street for sheriffs to talk to the surfers isn't addressing where the problem is. We need sheriffs during Saturdays, the very busiest days, and we need them at Coast Boulevard. We need them there. I talked about no view obstruction, no blocked access to trails, even more signage, and public awareness campaigns. Stop, look, and listen. We all got that when we were in elementary school. It's ingrained in us. We need to remind today's youth that's exactly what they need to do. I'd like to see a warning system at Coast Boulevard. So where is the problem? It's at Coast Boulevard. It's not necessary to fence the tracks to solve the problem. I would ask you to take another look, or at least, at the very least, look at the drone video. I could send a summary, if that were helpful, of my talk from January. Let's solve the problem where the problem is. Let's address it together. And Executive Director Tucker, I hope at some point I'm actually at the table with you rather than simply receiving updates. Thank you.
Board Chair Krantz.
Yes, sir.
If I may, so the underlying premise of the confidential negotiations is that the city has a representative at those negotiations. The Coastal Commission has a representative, and NCTD has a representative. The representative for NCTD is Tracy Foster. So she is representing NCTD along with specialized Coastal Commission staff, including the local staff that are working with City of Del Mar staff on the specific plan. If we go down this road, we're going to kind of defeat all of the efforts that are going on in a collaborative and a confidential way. I would very much assume that the city manager of Del Mar is briefing that city council and making sure they're aware of the discussions that are taking place. I can tell you a lot of what Mayor Gastelum articulated in terms of part of the visions are things that have been actively discussed. And guess what? This analysis is intended to be able to analyze all of those types of things and come forward with a specific proposal. But again, if we're trying to do this in a public way of every step of the way that the city elected officials are going to approve this, we're never going to come up with a comprehensive plan. We're never going to come up with a resolution. And from a staff perspective only, there's a tremendous amount of effort, time, resources, and money being spent. And I think my feedback to the board would be, I think the board needs to just make a decision about the go forward strategy. Because if we're not going to go forward with making sure that we're providing this kind of information, then this probably is not going to be worth spending a ton of staff time and public taxpayer dollars to advance this football down the field. Because it's just important that we are working in good faith, that we're negotiating in good faith, that when we meet amongst our partners in confidential settings and agree to do things, that these things are carried forward. So I'm hoping that the board, as you wrestle with this issue, comes to a place of consistency so that staff can, at all levels, Coastal Commission, the City of Del Mar, that we can appropriately put our resources in the right place and knowing that we're working consistent with the agreement that we have filed with the Surface Transportation Board.
Okay, thank you. Board Member McNamara.
Thank you, Tony. I just want to disclose as well that I did receive a text from Terry Gasterlin, and I also received but I did not follow up on it. And I also received the email from Dan Quirk, but I did not follow up on that either. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wonder if you could put slide number 5 back up. Oh, nope. It's the one with the that one right there. Yes. The resolution efforts, the proposed scope of work supports these items. Is that the contention that we have? You can read through these point by point, and it seems to me that the analysis that is part of this, the visual product the work product that will come from this addresses several of these points. Is that correct, Tracy?
That is correct.
And this was a part of Mayor Gasterlin's presentation in November.
For the city, it was the city adopted their priorities in addressing the railroad right of way.
Okay, Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you. So what Mayor Gasterland is asking is that we delay making a decision. Is time of the essence in making this decision and beginning this study?
So as you can see for our next steps, if we were to receive approval on this today, the soonest that we could get the draft report is August. And while we're going to do our best to speed that timeline up, that's what we're working at, with August being the delivery of the draft and October being the final report. It's the intent then that those reports go outward and be utilized further. So that only leaves us a few more months to then work with the results that we uncover as a result of the scope of work.
Thank you.
Mr. Tucker, could you give an indication of what the process might be in the event that the City of Del Mar reads the scope of work or has some issues with the contractor or the way the contract was let? Would there be a process whereby they could raise that objection outside the context of a board meeting?
Well, so that process actually did occur. So representatives were able to review that scope of work. I have people cringing looking at me, but I'm going to err on the side of transparency. Within the working group, the City of Del Mar staff got to see the scope of work as well as Coastal Commission staff. So that is actually occurring. So again, and I think the big question for us to understand is, who are we negotiating with?
Okay, thank you. Board Member Gasterlin.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I have a question. The question is probably for Executive Director Tucker. There are items in the scope of work that have been sketched. We have not seen a definition of a scope of work, but the items that have been sketched include mapping with elevation modeling, property boundaries, and view shed analysis. That's what's on the slide here. Other words that have been in there are fencing design and design support. That's where it crossed a boundary that without specifics, we simply cannot know what is being voted on. I would like to know, here's the question, what is the amount of money needed for the elevation modeling and the property boundaries. That could happen within the next month. And then we come back with a view shed analysis and a very clear definition of what design is needed to support that view shed analysis. It seems to me that story poles with 6-foot tall wires at the top, much as we have for design review board, would be able to help with a view shed analysis. But specifically, the mapping with elevation modeling and the property boundaries, what is the cost for just that?
I do want to, so Tracy is going to get into the details of the cost, but I do just want to kind of differentiate. So this board, when I was hired to run the day-to-day operations of the board, and the board was policy direction. So I've been here 13 plus years. And so we've never been in the position of going through the scopes of work with the board and asking and having the board ferret through scopes of work. That's not how the process works here. If the board wants to entertain that discussion with me in closed session, we should have that discussion. But that is not a process that we do. We provided this scope today just out of the transparency of the scope, and I'm sharing with you the fact that it was reviewed within the working group just out of the transparency. But I would have significant concerns that if the NCTD board wanted to make a transition between my day-to-day responsibility for the operations and its oversight role from a policy perspective. So I think that would be a separate discussion that I would just push to the chair to have that discussion. And if we need to have that discussion, I would prefer that discussion to be in closed session. So I'll turn it over to Tracy as it relates to cost.
The scope of work includes various tasks. Task 1 is field data collection and mapping. And that mapping is the detail is the first bullet under scope of work on the slide that I'm showing you right now. The other tasks are optional tasks that we can exercise, and that includes the survey, design, and design support. So the task 1 work for just the field data collection, mapping, the elevation modeling, and view shed analysis, that is $80,962. There's also some general administrative work that would be a portion of that. In total, the general administrative work, which includes things like obtaining permits and such, is 53. And when I say permits, I mean right of entry permits for them to access the right of way. That's $53,615.
Okay, thanks. And Tracy, if you could, it's my recollection that from the study that was done a couple of years ago and resulted in some fencing recommendations for Oceanside, Encinitas, and Del Mar, there were essentially red lines in the document that were along this NCTD property line for the corridor. And the point of what we are doing within this scope of work is to allow a visual representation of where that property line is and what might happen if we took the fence and put it closer to the ocean, leaving some area of the North County Transit District right of way for public use. Is that part of what is intended to be accomplished with this?
So if somebody's going to get in trouble, I'll let it be me. So the focus has really been on trying to achieve some of the goals articulated by the Coastal Commission in terms of safe access up top, improvement and formalization of the trails, and very much limiting the fencing to where it's needed at the track level. And so what you're saying, Tony, is spot on in the sense that from my point of view, one of the outcomes that I've said is I want to see a visualization created that if you were walking, you would be able to see exactly what type of fence would be at a specific location.
And there was mention of a 6-foot chain link with concertina wire across the top. We'll have, various fence heights to review. So if they wanted to, if there was the option for a post and cable instead of chain link, that could be a part of the discussion and would be modeled.
It's already part of the discussion and will be modeled. And so it is significantly less chain link fence. There's no concertina wire proposed than what was originally envisioned by the study, which just looked at it at a very kind of raw level. But it is significantly less than what was discussed, Tony. In fact, some of the fencing that is proposed is the exact fencing that exists there right now.
Like adjacent to the culvert that runs about from 8th Street down to 4th Street or so.
Yep. In fact, you and I called it the fall protection fencing.
Fall protection fencing. And I believe that was installed by Sandag when they put that culvert in there.
Absolutely, sir. You're correct.
Yeah.
So it's that's why I said this is very much a refined proposal that now the desire is to get the additional analysis that is needed, create the visual illustrations so that folks can gain a really good understanding of it.
Okay, Board Member Gaslin, your hand is still up. You told me that that's kind of permanent,
Yeah.
but did you have more comments that you wanted to make?
I do. Thank you very much, Chair Kranz. So I believe that I heard that bullet number 1, mapping with elevation modeling, property boundaries, and view shed analysis is $189,000 of the 388. That would leave design with the other 200K, which would include the 53,000 for the right of entry. I would certainly, if those right of entry permits are from Del Mar, I would certainly be interested in cooperating further with NCTD and bringing back to my council. Let's work together on this. Right of entry permits, $50,000 is an awful lot of money. And I would welcome working on that. Sandag has not put fencing up. What we have on the bluff right now from 8th down to, it's not to 4th, it's to 5.5. It's to the unnamed alley immediately south of 6th Street. So it's 2 blocks of orange rope that is strung from temporary little metal post. It's a little piece of metal that's stuck into the ground. And that's to protect the new landscaping that's there. There's a bunch of grass and many native plants that have been planted. It's an exciting trail right along there. However, no one has ever fallen off of that at all, ever. This has been there for an extraordinary long time. The reconstruction of the top of that bluff that happened bared it of plants, and those plants are attempting to regrow. There is a wire fence that's needed at what we call the amphitheater. These are a set of giant steps that go from that upper bluff to the lower bluff. And it's important that since that's concrete below, not landscaping that has not yet grown in, that it's there. So it is incorrect to say that there is fencing from 8th Street South. That is simply incorrect. So back to the mapping, bullet 1, that's 189,000. I would propose an amendment to the motion that rather than approving the 88,000, that you approve the 189,000 for the elevation modeling, property boundaries, and view shed analysis, not to include any specific design of fencing. Do I have a second?
No, we got a substitute motion on the floor that.
Yeah, and I'm making an amendment to the substitute motion.
Is the motion maker interested in that amendment? Amenable.
Okay, thank you.
Could you repeat the amendment?
My amendment is to fund the 189,000 for the first bullet, the mapping with elevation modeling, property boundaries, and view shed analysis. And that would leave out the 200,000 for survey design and design support. And I would work with the city for the purposes of the first bullet, as long as that 53,000 is not part of the 189,000, to waive the permits. If the 53,000 is part of the 189,000, then I'm moving for 189 minus the 53,000. That is my amendment. Thank you, Board Member Desmond.
This is
I would
Tracy. I
second
just
that.
want to clarify on the dollar amounts, if I could, and the right of way permitting. The right of way, the 53,615 is general services. So it's administrative services of the contractor, billing, right of entry permit, and that's an NCTD right of entry permit. We require everyone entering the right of way to be permitted, even our contractors. And so it has nothing to do with the city. It's other general administrative work in that 53,615. The mapping with elevation modeling, boundaries and view shed analysis is 80,962. Thank you.
80,962. Is that what I heard?
Correct.
For bullet one? Okay, then my amendment, I will restate it. First, I'm sorry that I can't try to work with the city to save NCDOT a little bit of money. Even 50,000 is a lot of money. So my modification would be to authorize today $80,962 for the first bullet, the mapping with elevation modeling, property boundaries, and view shed analysis. And I will try to lower my hand.
Chair, I would second that motion. I see that as an attempt to, it looks like the will of the group here is to go with a substitute motion. And I see that the city of Del Mar is trying to work with everybody on, doing it on, as quickly as she can think on how to make this go positively. And then with the things that she, and I don't know what these materials are. Okay. I no idea. But that then this gets them to where they need to go to continue the apparently very positive discussions that have been going on.
Mayor Gastelum, I appreciate your effort in trying to work together on this. I just think, the more information we can get, the sooner we can get it, the better. Because it seems like, so anyway, that's my whole push for this. I just want to get, I'm very interested in the, how it might be designed and laid out and everything else so that we all are on the same page. So I'm not going to accept the amendment to the substitute motion. And I'd like to ask Tony to call the question.
Well, respectfully, Board Member Desmond, design of fencing crosses over into territory that may be gray zone. And we need to look carefully. Is fencing design as proposed here within the scope that was excluded in the stay with the Surface Transportation Board?
And I appreciate your comments. We have depended on Mr. Tucker and his staff to put forward a contract and a contractor to accomplish what has been agreed upon in confidential negotiations. And I too think that what we need to do now is call the question. So Anthony, please call the roll for a vote.
Point of clarification, point of order. I did second the motion for amendment. That amendment requires a second. You don't go to the first. There was a substitute motion, and that motion was on the floor.
Yeah,
there's no such thing as having it.
So there was an original motion, and then there was a substitute motion.
I understand.
Technically, we should have voted on the substitute motion, but I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to talk. And so what we're going to do is we're going to call the question on the substitute motion at this time.
Well, are you going to be calling the are you going to be voting on the calling of the question?
Yeah, we're going to vote on that. We're going to call the question and on the substitute motion. Yes. And so no substitute motion to the substitute motion. So there's nothing to second. She was asking for Board Member Desmond to modify his substitute motion. So that's.
So there was a motion to close debate, and was that seconded?
Yeah, we're going to call the question.
It wasn't.
Anthony,
No.
please call the roll.
This is to close debate, right? It's not the main motion.
No, this is the motion. The substitute motion.
You have to vote on the motion, which is to close debate.
We don't generally have
Follow
motions
Robert's
to
rules. You
close
don't literally
debate.
follow
So
Robert's rules.
I will defer to the general counsel for her interpretation of what the next step should be. And I have expressed my desire to call the question on the substitute motion.
So this is Lori Winfrey, General Counsel. I think the first issue is that I do believe that you need to close the debate. And so I think there needs to be a vote on that item. But prior to that, I just wanted to note on the record that based on the disclosures that have been made today, it appears likely that there was a violation of the Brown Act by way of serial communication. The penalties that can include civil and criminal penalties, and if the violation is challenged, it can also result in a ban from holding public office. So the reason for my original admonition. A demand to cure would typically include setting aside the action and rehearing being scheduled to allow disclosure of improper communications at a later time. That said, since the disclosures have been made by the board members today from the dais, I believe the board can elect to proceed with action on this item today, but the board should be aware that there is still potential for a challenge based on that Brown Act violation that appears to have occurred. So I just want to make that clear first before the board takes action on this item.
Okay, then this vote is to close debate.
Okay, so I made the motion to call the question and you're seconding it, Tony, is that right?
Yeah, and I guess before we can have a vote on the substitute motion, we need to have a vote on closing debate.
Okay.
So moved.
Such vote I have never had in my 8 years on the North County Transit District Board, so it's new to me.
I move we close the public hearing.
Okay, and I would second that, and then we can have our vote on closing. It's not really a public hearing, but
Closing
we'll close debate.
Yeah.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Edson to close the debate, seconded by Board Chair Krantz. Board Member Bapata, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasterland,
No.
Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara,
Aye.
Board Member Sanchez,
No.
Board Member Desmond,
Aye.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes with all board members present voting yes. Board members Gasterland and Sanchez vote no.
Okay, thank you. And so we will now vote on the substitute motion by Desmond to approve staff recommendation.
Okay, so if I may, my understanding of trying to follow along in terms of the motions and substitute is that we had an original motion on the floor from Board Member Gasterland, which was to continue the vote on this action or this item to another time. Subsequent to that, we had a substitute motion, and so that was motion and second on the original motion. We had a substitute motion by Board Member Desmond that was to go with staff recommendation that's being presented today. We had a second by Board Member Bhat Patel on that. Subsequent to that, if I'm understanding correctly, what I'm hearing, we have Board Member Gasterland making an amendment to her original motion, which is to modify the scope of the staff recommendation related to the scope of work. And that would include those items specified in the deliverables task number 1, but would also necessarily require those specified services that are general to this type of action, which is flagging and the preparation of meeting reports. And that was for a dollar amount of $189,000, I believe, was the
It
final
changed to 80,962. Thank you.
80,000. I'm sorry.
That's what I was told by Tracy, 80,962.
Okay, so 80,962. So my understanding is that is the substitute motion or the amendment to the original motion that is on the floor for the first vote.
No.
No,
Well, it was
the
originally
original-
an
the
amendment
original- The
to,
original motion was to table this, and then there was a substitute motion to move forward with it. And so why would we be voting on the original motion?
A point of order. I believe the reason why the attorney is saying that is there was a motion to amend what was then became a main motion after it successfully substituted the first motion. So the main motion then became the substitute motion. So there was a motion, it was seconded, and then there was an amendment to that main motion, which was made by board member Gasterlin that I seconded, and that is why the attorney is saying that. So that is still on the table. Chair Krantz, if you don't want to recognize it, then I guess that's your prerogative. But there was.
Well, I don't frankly know if it is my prerogative. I'm going to follow the general counsel, and we'll have votes until we're finished. And she tells me that we're done.
Jump in real quick. The request for the dollar amounts by Mayor Gasterlin was, she asked if I would amend my motion, the substitute motion, to include that. That wasn't made on the original motion. And even if it was, the substitute still has to be heard. So I said no. I rejected the amendment to the substitute motion, and therefore the substitute motion stands, and that's what should be voted on now, as is. And the first motion is moot until we get through the substitute motion.
And so I will defer to the general counsel. And I think that as board member Desmond describes it, he is correct. That's how we have generally handled it at our city with substitute motions. And the one thing that I did deviate from is that generally substitute motions are supposed to be voted on without deliberation. But the original motion came so quickly that I felt it was important to let the board have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments. So Lori, you tell us what we're supposed to be voting on next.
Yes, based on a review of Robert's Rules of Order, I believe that the first motion, the original motion, appears to still be standing. I do not believe that has been waived at this point. And so I think the board has two options, to vote on the original motion. And if that is unsuccessful, then to vote on the substitute motion. The amendment to that substitute motion was rejected.
Okay, so the original motion was to table this. So is that correct, board member Gaston?
what does it mean to waive a motion? I would like a point of order.
I just waived the amendment. I didn't waive the motion.
I'd like to hear from Lori. What would it mean? What would be the mechanism? What would be the implication of me waiving my original motion to continue?
I believe withdrawing would be the right verbiage for that. I've never heard the original motion being withdrawn.
Okay.
Yes, because there was no withdrawal. There was a substitute motion made instead.
I'm busy with a point of order with Lori right now. Lori, what does it mean to withdraw? What would the implications be if I withdraw the motion to continue? Can I then put a substitute motion on top of the current motion on the floor? Or does a motion belong to the body? Yeah.
If you withdraw the original motion, then the next in line is the substitute motion made by board member Desmond.
And then can a substitute motion be made on what becomes the primary motion?
Yes, you can, but you have to vote on the substitute motion first, made by board member Desmond.
Okay, so I'll clarify. I made a motion to continue the item. I remain completely open to a vote which would fund bullet number 1, mapping. However, that was not my original motion. My original motion was a motion to continue. On top of that, Supervisor Desmond, Board Member Desmond, made a motion to go with the staff recommendation in the spirit of cooperativity and moving forward and making sure that we're all in lockstep and that no one is doing something that is at cross purposes with the agreement for the stay for the Surface Transportation Board. I offered an amendment, and that was an amendment to Board Member Desmond's motion. My amendment was to fund bullet 1. That amendment was rejected. I will state for the record that should this motion fail, I will immediately amend my motion to continue to be a motion to fund bullet number 1, mapping, elevation with property boundaries and view shed analysis for $80,962.
Okay, thank you. We're going to now vote on the substitute motion by Desmond and the second by Bob Patel. So Anthony, please call a roll for a vote.
On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member Priya Bapatal to approve agenda item 16 as presented by staff. Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasterland?
Because the City of Del Mar and NCTD are in litigation, I will abstain.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Sanchez?
No.
Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
No.
Okay. On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member Priya Bapatal to approve agenda item 16 as presented by staff, motion passes with Board Members Contreras and Board Member Sanchez voting no. Board Member Gasterland abstain.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 17, Yoon Park Lynch is going to provide us with a presentation regarding potential pilot fare reduction programs.
You want me to start? Good afternoon, board members. We will be making a presentation under agenda item number 17 on the regarding potential pilot fare reduction programs. Katie Persons will be presenting the first few slides, and then we also have Brian Lane from Sandag at the end of the presentation to answer some questions on some of the material that's been presented.
Good afternoon. For a bit of context, at the March Board of Directors meeting, the board directed staff to provide information regarding potential youth opportunity passes, pilot opportunities, and potential sources of funding. At last month's meeting, our legislative representative provided an update on legislative efforts to fund reduced or free fares. And this presentation will include some potential options and relevant information for your consideration. Okay. So this slide may look a bit familiar from last month's meeting, but a good resource to revisit. This information comes from Sandag's 2015 onboard survey, and the intent of these next few slides is to give just a high-level overview of some of our rider demographics to help inform the discussion surrounding youth fare subsidies. Some key takeaways from this slide: the majority of Breeze and Sprinter riders had an annual household income less than $40,000, and a large portion of Breeze and Sprinter riders use transit 4 or more days per week. Building off of that a little bit, we have the trip purpose for our Breeze and Sprinter customers. You'll see here on this slide that the most common Breeze trip purpose is home to work at 33%, followed by home to school at 27%. And on this next slide, this chart shows Sprinter trip purpose with a larger proportion of trips between home and school at 37%, followed by home to work at 27%. So that isn't particularly surprising, just given the number of educational institutions located along the Sprinter corridor, but it helps us to understand how our riders are using the system in each of our modes. This chart here shows the estimated breakdown of NCTD's service area population by age group. This information is handy to have when we're looking at the different types of youth opportunity pass options and when we're estimating the potential impact to the district. So we'll refer back to these numbers when Yoon discusses the opportunity pass options. But in total, there are approximately 283,000 residents between 5 and 24 years old in North County. And of that group, approximately 130,000 are between the ages of 10 and 19 years old. So with that, I'll hand it over to Yoon to discuss some of the details.
The SANDAG Comprehensive Fare Ordinance is the ordinance that establishes the fares for the region. It is important to know any updates to the Comprehensive Fare Ordinance are approved by the SANDAG Transportation Committee. Within the ordinance, there's already some fare reductions and discounts provided to youth and senior. And in the last ordinance that was updated back in 2019, the discount was expanded for day passes for youth as well. And during the last proposed fare ordinance that will go live by the end of this year, we're also incorporating fare capping, which will allow passengers to get the best fares for both their daily and monthly trips. However, within the fare ordinance, there's some flexibility for providing pilot programs. And as long as those programs are for a period up to 1 year, they can be implemented by each individual agency without having SANDAG or regional approval. Within some of the discounts that are provided within the ordinance, it also includes significant discounts for day passes for senior and disabled, as well as 68% discount on monthly passes. Youth that are ages under 5 can ride for free. We also provide additional discounts provided to college students that are either on a monthly or trimester program, and as well as discounts for employer-sponsored passes. Within the free transfer point of view, Coaster already allows free transfer to Sprinter Breeze, and with the new changes that are happening to the ordinance, once the Pronto system goes live at the end of this year, there will be free transfer within the Breeze, Sprinter, and then within the MTS bus and trolley service. So any plans to implement any permanent discounts have to be agreed upon at the regional level. As I indicated earlier, those have to go through the regional fare ordinance, and therefore meaning that both MTS and SANDAG and NCT will have to agree to those changes. However, within the option of the pilot program, there's flexibility for each agency to implement a short-term program not to exceed 1 year. One of the things that we have to, as we consider different options or alternatives for providing some discounts on a pilot basis, and there's different alternatives, either providing discounts for youth up to and to adults up to age 24. We can also have the alternative number 2, which provides discounts for youth that are middle and high schoolers. And the third alternative will be providing some discount to targeted youth population that receive meal assistance. Depending on what alternative is chosen, obviously the fiscal impact will vary depending on the population that will benefit from any of potential discounts. So under alternative number 1, which will provide free travel for youth and for adults up to 24 years of age, this is probably the one that has the highest negative fiscal impact. We're talking about approximately 283,000 residents in North County that could benefit from this pass. A lot of these population either go to local colleges or also commute to work. And that will, in addition to that potential loss of fares, we're also looking at loss of fares from the youth population, which are those that are ages from 5 to 17. The alternative number 2, that one will have a lower fiscal impact than the alternative number 1. We're talking about a lower population of about 130,000, and this will benefit for the most part those youth that are ages between 10 and 19 and that attend either middle school or high school. And then under alternative number 3, which provides free travel for a more targeted population, which are those that are qualified for meal assistance. That's approximately 38,000 students that could benefit from this program. So I will be presenting one alternative, which is it's not a free alternative, but it's a reduced fare alternative. This is the Sprinter Breeze Pass. So the Sprinter Breeze Pass is a pass that used to be in existence at NCTD before the last update of the fare ordinance that occurred in 2019, based on feedback from the regional partners. There was a desire to consolidate the fares under a regional umbrella. And under that premise, the Sprinter Breeze Pass was discontinued. The great thing about this pass, about bringing it back, is that it will have a reduction of 18% to the current adult regional pass, and it will benefit for the most part all the Sprinter Breeze riders within the North County. So there will not be any significant fiscal impact. If anything, it will probably either fiscally neutral or it will be on the positive side. So with that said, I will be moving the presentation to Katie, who will be presenting other options for potential funding sources.
Thank you. Mic on. So we've also assembled a list of funding sources where fare subsidies could potentially be a standalone project or an element of a program of projects. However, we have a few caveats with this list. The first is to consider that these are discretionary funding sources that would not provide a long-term dedicated funding source, so could only be used potentially for a pilot program. The first on this slide, the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, or LC-TOP, is an annual allocation-based program that provides funding for a variety of project types. And in order to advance NCTD's transition to zero-emission bus operations, we've assumed that the funding from this program will largely be dedicated to the procurement of zero-emission buses and related infrastructure, at least through FY 2025. Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, or TIRCP, is another competitive program that could potentially be a source for fare subsidies. However, the program guidelines are subject to change, and traditionally TIRCP funding has been used to fund transformative capital projects, so substantial funding for fare subsidies may not be the most competitive project within this particular program. And finally, there is a program called the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, which is a newer pilot funding program that funds a variety of equity-focused projects. Since this program is a pilot, it's currently unclear how long this program may be available, but is certainly one for us to keep our eye on. One recent grant application submittal we want to highlight here is a potential microtransit pilot within the city of Vista. This application represents a pretty robust partnership between multiple public agencies and community-based organizations. UC San Diego submitted the application on behalf of NCTD, SANDAG, Vista Community Clinic, and 211 San Diego. This pilot is really a research opportunity to use human-centered design and planning in the implementation of microtransit service. And this project includes a proposed flex microtransit zone within the city of Vista and would rely on those community-based organizations in the area to engage with the community and gain a better understanding of how the service could best suit the needs of residents and NCTD riders. And one of the research questions from this project is focused on identifying an efficient program for implementing targeted fare subsidies and would utilize the available resources from 211 San Diego, Vista Community Clinic, and the other public agencies on the team. Another important element to consider is the inclusion of fare discounts within the 2021 regional plan. This upcoming plan is unique in that it includes a project expense specifically for paying down subsidies, with the $5 billion estimate derived from SANDAG's modeling exercises as part of the regional plan development. Among the priority implementation action items associated with the regional plan is the Regional Transit Fare Impact Study, which over the course of 6 to 12 months will evaluate all of the relevant impacts associated with implementing a regional fare subsidy program. So we've summarized here some staff recommendations, and that includes support for a Sprinter Breeze adult monthly pass pilot to help recover ridership post-COVID-19, as Yoon mentioned, support the microtransit pilot opportunity in Vista, support ongoing regional coordination with SANDAG and MTS for evaluation of fare subsidy pilot opportunities and impacts, and work with MetroLink to implement targeted coaster fare reductions or promotional opportunities. Based on those, we've highlighted some key next steps, and that includes incorporating feedback from today's meeting, developing an implementation plan based on that feedback, advancing efforts to identify funding for the Vista microtransit pilot if we're not ultimately successful through our recent grant application, and continuing to monitor funding programs or sources for piloting fare subsidies. And with that, we have questions.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Contreras.
Yes, thank you so much. This is a very important item of discussion here, and I appreciate it being before the board. I have a question regarding on the staff recommendation. So the support microtransit pilot opportunity in Vista, I just want to make sure I heard it correct. This is only if funding is not received. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't know yet if we'll be successful on that recent submittal, but we expect to know in fall of 2021.
Okay. And on bullet point number 1, support Sprinter Breeze adult monthly pass pilot to recover ridership, the $59 monthly pass. Is that only for 1 year, the pilot program?
Yes.
Okay. I think that, a pass that is a 18% discount is great. Since we're only able to do a pilot program for 1 year and we have this situation of COVID, we're seeing that 71% of our riders have an annual income less than 40,000. I really do see alternative number 1, even though it, is not going to generate the type of revenue that we would want. I really do see a 1-year pilot program for youth up to 24 years old as being a potential economic boost to the region, especially if it's capped at, being 1 year. So I would be supportive of a pilot program for our youth up to 24 years old, simply because I do really believe that it would be go hand in hand with our COVID recovery and how we want to see that at a regional level. 100% support microtransit pilot opportunity in Vista. Shall, funding fall through from a different source? 100% support regional coordination with SANDAG and MTS for evaluation of pilot opportunities and impacts, and support 100% the implemented targeted coaster fare reductions, promotional opportunities as part of a pilot program with MetroLink. But I would support alternative number 1. So I just kind of want to see what the rest of my colleagues have to say, but those are my thoughts for right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Gastrolin.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I'm unmuted. I'm back on my laptop. My technical difficulties have been fixed. Option number one, or alternative number one, is so important for several reasons, and I'll be asking about the cost for it. When I was a kid in high school, I took the T4 bus in Washington, D.C. suburbs from one after school from math class to get to exercise classes of various sorts. The T4, the J2, these were incredibly important buses, and riding them as a kid means I ride the 101 bus now. And I look at our university, I watch lines of students lining up to go get on the bus, the various buses, the 30 is an example, the 101 is another, to leave campus and go home to go do their homework. So alternative number one, I wonder if it really is all that expensive. If you think about the fact that these kids are not riding the bus, they're not costing anything, they'd only be more expensive if they're displacing people who would otherwise pay fares. So I'd like to know if in the modeling for the costs, was it determined the degree to which the kids who would be subsidized, and this is up through age 24, are substituting or replacing people who would otherwise pay fares? Or are we really doing an investment in the future, much as I experienced as a child and became a lifelong bus rider? I'd like to hear about how the modeling was done to determine this as an expensive option.
Well, I would say the monthly pass for the most part will benefit those that are ages up to 24, which are adults 18 to 24. For the youth, the better discount is provided, but the youth regional monthly pass, that one is priced at $23. So what we're talking about is, for the most part, when the proposal was made to NCTD to come back with a proposed fare for youth ages to 24, this monthly pass will benefit for the most part those are ages 18 to 24, since the youth have a better discount with the regional monthly.
And so I'm going to piggyback a little bit to say, so we tried to give you some specific recommendations that we have funding or have the capacity to implement right away. So we can do the Sprinter Breeze, and we have history with that. Again, the difference between that, it means is just you're capped with your travel in North County. And because we don't have to do regional revenue sharing, it's kind of revenue neutral to revenue positive for us. So we can do that safely, but it doesn't require us to replace those dollars. Everything else we're talking about is relative to a grant. So as we look at additional alternatives that the board may choose to adopt as strategies, we would have to go and get a permanent source of funding. And we would also have to work through some of the state laws. And, to give an example of something that we did in the past was the LC Top. Now, right now, we're using the LC Top dollars to fund our zero emission bus program. So if the board were to say, we want to redirect those dollars, then our entire 5-year capital and replacement program focused on the implementation of zero emission bus program would have a significant hole. But when we did use those dollars for the Sprinter in the past, it had a negative impact on our fare box recovery. So we used them in the past. It was a student program underwriting. So it had a negative impact. So again, just to put a fine point on it, what we are proposing is things that we have more control over right now, things that we can implement right now. Sort of the broader discussions of these bigger ticket items are going to require a dedicated source of funding and changes to law. Obviously, if the board wants to use its reserve for this, the board could do that. I wouldn't say it's a good use of our limited reserve that we have. But what we've given you now as a strategy is what we can deliver upon now.
Okay, Board Member Sanchez.
Thank you. I want to say that I support Member Contreras' comments, however you want to classify them as, and this is what we're discussing now. When I was a student at in Rhode Island at Brown University, and I rode the bus monthly passes. And there was a difference in culture there. Everybody rode the bus. It wasn't just poor people. It wasn't just seniors. It was everyone. Same thing when I went to law school in San Francisco, I got a student pass and it covered everything, right? It covered the subway, it covered Muni, it covered the buses, it covered everything. And same thing, we need to change the culture here. And who is the most positive, which group is the best to do that, start to do that with? And it's the youth. So I do feel that we need to go that direction. I'm hearing there are financial constraints, but we really ought to find a way to make it happen that way, because otherwise we're never going to get, here in North County especially, we're never going to get anyone to change their habits of getting in a car. And when are all the cars going to be electric? We need to get people off the streets, and students are the best place to start that with. And we have, junior colleges and we have colleges, and it would be so great to extend the importance of the sprinter, for one, doesn't go anywhere except for a couple of places, and to be able to really maximize ridership, which then will maximize the funds that will be available for NCTD. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Edson, or Vice Chair Edson. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you to staff for the presentation. And so I also support the Sprinter Breeze Adult Monthly Pass, all the items that are here in front of us on slide 34, to help recover ridership and support microtransit pilot for opportunity in Vista, because I think that's a great pilot program, and hope to learn from it. Support regional cooperation with SANDAG and MTS for evaluation of pilot opportunities and impacts, so that we can have more of these opportunities, hopefully, and to implement targeted coaster fare reductions and promotional opportunities as part of a pilot program with Metrolink. Could I see the slide that had the 3 other items? The alternatives, thank you. I would like nothing better than to offer free fare, free travel for youth up to 24 years old. But I'm hearing from staff that there are some negatives that would result from that. Matt, can you go over this again? Apologies.
It's very simple. We don't have the money. So I'm not opposed to any of these alternatives. We just would need, so if we got a new and expanded sales tax, then we would be able to do this and be able to comply with the state performance requirements as well, because those dollars would be counted as if it's a passenger within the realm of the fare box recovery. So the whole issue about this is that it's free for the rider, but it's not free for the transit agency. So we have to have a new sales tax in place to be able to provide the scope of benefits that have been talked about.
Okay, so these alternatives that are up here aren't really alternatives for us to make a decision on today. Am I getting that?
Right. So really what this comes from is this is what's being discussed at the regional level.
Okay.
And so SANDAG's response to this discussion is those things, those dollars that they are planning to include in a potential new sales tax measure subject to the approval of their board of directors. And then they're doing a fair study to come up with key recommendations of what types of programs to put in place.
And what is the fastest time that they could put that on the ballot?
Ma'am, I don't know.
We have Brian Lane on the phone
Okay.
that can answer all these questions.
Brian?
I don't know if I could answer that either. I mean, it's a couple years away, right? We would have to obviously get the board to first approve the regional plan and then start talking about new funding measures. And that's, definitely on the table with the regional plan that as it's drafted. And then we need the board to, really start scrambling to talk about new sales tax measures. But it would be a couple years away at least until it would be on a ballot. And then when it would be enacted would be a year or so after that. But I also like to just point out that, we've heard from your board about looking at youth fairs. We heard stakeholders at MTS's board when we were doing the fare changes. They were also mentioning the youth fair. So Hassan has taken that to heart and is asking staff to look at ways to find revenues now to start thinking about this. So we'll be over the next month or so talking about this a lot internally at Sandag, and hopefully we can have more information about this.
Well, thank you for those comments. So the other thing that I heard from you, Matt, was that there would need to be legislative changes. Is that correct?
Well, so what I said was a couple of things. So depending on the color of money that we use, it has detrimental impacts. So like LC top, when we use LC top dollars for a fare write down, it had a detrimental impact to our fare box recovery because those dollars don't get classified as customer revenue. They are derived from the state. But what the state did several years ago in terms of reform, that if a local sales tax initiative passed and provided those dollars, then those dollars through that local sales tax initiative would not be punitive in terms of the calculation towards fare box recovery.
Is there a way to allow other sources of income to, not just sales tax revenue, for example, grant money or anything like that, not to impact fare box recovery and then negatively?
All grant revenue, almost any source of revenue. So the attachment that we provided, we went through an exhaustive list of all of the funding sources that are available. So for example, and I'm going to throw out a couple of terms that you guys go like, I have no idea what the heck he's talking about. Congestion mitigation, air quality improvement funds, surface transportation funds, which are flexible highway transportation funds. CMAQ money, for example, can be used for temporary projects or projects that reduce air pollution. But the fact of the matter is, it's the same issue as the LC top dollars, is that those dollars don't count as customer revenue. More importantly, none of those dollars are available to NCTD, as those dollars go directly to Sandag.
So if magically Sandag was able to provide funding for such a program, you're saying it still would not help, it would be negative as far as fare box recovery goes?
No. Well, it would be negative towards fare box recovery, but the state has already built in offset in terms of the local sales tax that would obviate the impact. So we would measure fare box recovery. In fact, we do it in two ways. We measure it in pure fare box recovery, and then we also measure it in terms of the state methodology, which will allow us to take a local sales tax into consideration for fare box recovery. And so if Sandag were able to pass a new initiative, get a new initiative passed, the voters supported it, while it would hurt our pure fare box number, but in terms of the fare box recovery number that the state also allows us to use as a secondary test, we would continue to be able to pass that test. So I'm saying that would be fine. We could make it work within that framework. I'm saying any other color of money just about would have a negative impact other than a new local sales tax measure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Bhat Patel.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. And yeah, I'm definitely interested in wanting to look at options for how we could potentially pursue alternative one. I am supportive of all of the staff recommendations that were presented. I do want to make mention of that. But at the same time, similarly, someone who grew up here in North County and attended school locally, I definitely would have benefited from being able to utilize free transit. And I know for sure, for a fact, others that were in the same boat. I know quite a few folks that were, taking the 101 down to, and you're hearing my son in the background. So, but yeah, there were quite a few folks that were attending school that were definitely, I think would benefit from this as well. So definitely would be curious to hear, ways that we could figure out how to fund this particular option. I'm hearing that there may not be the potential, completely right now, but at the same time, I do think that it is something that I would want to be supportive of and figure out ways to, whether it's us advocating for that funding or looking for more funding or figuring out ways within our own, own capacity at the board. I do think that it is something worth investing in.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Contreras.
So of the alternatives, so we don't have funding for even alternative number 3, which is fair free travel for targeted middle and high school youth. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we're running into the same issue. Well, I mean, I'm super supportive of what staff has put in front of us as a recommendation. I would make a motion to accept staff's recommendation with the addition of, it seems like the majority of the board really wants to support getting to alternative number 1. So, I would like, I know that it can't be implemented. There are significant obstacles at this point, but I do think that we should be updated on the progress of getting to a place where alternative number 1 is feasible. So I would like to continue to get updates on that. And if the time comes where it is feasible, then, as a board, we can discuss implementation. So my motion would be staff's recommendation, but including continuing to get updates on alternative number 1, but that not being actionable at this time.
Second.
Okay, Board Member Gastrolin, did you have more comment?
I do. I hear that there's no money for this, and I guess I have a point of confusion. If these are kids who are not riding on the buses right now and giving them a free pass that does have a dollar amount on the pass, gets them on the bus, it doesn't actually cost anything beyond paying for the mechanism of getting the pass into their hand. If we're going from empty seats to kids in seats or youth in seats, where those youth at some point will then start paying a fare, we are investing in the future. So my point of confusion is, am I looking at this incorrectly? Where would the lost fare be?
Well, I'm not going to tell a board member that they're looking at something incorrectly. But the fact of the matter,
You can tell me that, Matt. It's okay.
I'll tell you that privately. Come on. The point of the matter is, and so let's just walk back. So pre-COVID, we were taking in, call it $15 million a year. So the premise that you're kind of articulating is, if the people who were riding pre-COVID and paying their fares, if they continued to ride, and then we told a bunch of folks who were not riding that you could come on board and ride for free on the exact routes that we have today, that it would be revenue neutral. But that's not the premise, and that's not what this is talking about. So the premise, what you're talking about, would make it free for all, which means you would then lose revenue from the base of the money that you were capturing in FY19. You follow me?
I do. So a question. So at the university, so UC California campus, parking is just atrocious. So there have been subsidy programs and free pass programs to get students onto the buses so that they wouldn't be clogging the parking lots and trying to find spaces and parking illegally. And that program has worked really well. It started out free, and that got people riding the buses. And after a few years of that, the passes are now subsidized in cost, and the students are paying the subsidized cost. So has a model been looked at that's staged, where you get people, you change people's behavior, as Board Member Contreras so well said, and also Board Member Sanchez, you change people's behavior, and with a great incentive, making it crystal clear, manage the expectations. You know, this free pass is for a while. People realize it, they start riding the bus, and then they keep riding the bus, and now they're paying the subsidized pass. And it could be that the school system might participate in subsidies. It could be that there are other ways to find subsidies. I heard the ideas of grants, you know, maybe a year worth of free pass could then turn into grants. So I would encourage looking hard at ways to do this. The idea is to increase future ridership.
Yes, ma'am. We totally agree. And there are programs similar to what you've described that we've implemented. Here's my encouragement to the board. Within the budget item that Yoon's about to present, if that were to be approved, we're planning to invest a significant amount of money in market research and analysis. I think one of the things that we have to be really careful about is we all have ideas of what we think will generate transit ridership. I'm proposing that we spend significant amount of money to go out and reach out to businesses, to customers, and do a lot of scenario planning and analysis around some of the things that we're implementing. I think for the board, it would be really good to move forward with these pilots, because there is so much on the table that we're discussing in terms of service planning that you're going to need to consider before you think about the things that are being discussed in a broader sense. And I'll give you an example. One of the consistent feedbacks I've always heard from people is about parents of kids, middle school and high school, getting them to school because it's so expensive to buy them a car, to get them insurance, and the VMT that's generated from parents doing those trips. Now, some of those services can be implemented relatively low cost. Some of those services kind of are closer to like an Uber trip, but it's something that we're looking at within a certain context to be able to roll out. And I think it's important that we don't end up tying our hands, because we may be undercutting markets that we don't get today. So I would encourage the board, all of this is like great discussion. And if money was an object, we'd say, let's do it all. But I would really ask the board to kind of let's go on this journey. And it's not a 2 years journey. It's over the course of the next year. And let's focus in on recovery, ridership restoration, market analysis, so that we can be in the best position to make these kinds of big decisions. Because one of the things you're going to face in the new sales tax initiative is, where can you put money? Where are you going to direct money over the course of that program? And I can tell you, you're going to have some tough choices, because to do fare free transit countywide is more than $100 and something million per year. Okay. So I would just say, please, let's advance forward, and then let's take this one step at a time, because these are great ideas, great discussions point, but they merit a significant more discussion than what we're prepared to have today.
Okay, board member, Vice Chair Edson.
I support Councilmember Contreras's motion, but I think maybe Councilmember Patel may have seconded really quietly.
Yes, she did second, and
Okay.
I'm also supportive.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Okay, so we have a motion by board member Contreras and a second by board member Bhat Patel. And
On the motion of board member Contreras, seconded by board member Bapatal, to approve agenda item 17 as presented by staff, with the addition of receiving updates to funding alternative number 1, free travel for youth up to 24 years old. Board member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board member Gastelum?
Aye.
Board Chair Krantz?
aye.
Board member McNamara?
Aye.
Board member Sanchez?
Sanchez, yes.
Board member Desmond?
Aye.
Board member Jenkins? Board member Edson? I'm sorry, Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
Motion passes with all board members present voting yes. Board Member Jenkins absent.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that. And thanks, Board Member Contreras, for your advocacy in this particular area. And so with that, we're on to informational items 18 through 20. And there are 3 informational items. Yoon Park Lynch is going to provide us an update regarding the development of the proposed FY 2022 operating budget and FY 2022 through FY 2026 capital improvement program.
Good afternoon, board members. So before I get started with the numbers, I will start with providing the background of all the multiple steps that we have done in the last few months to get on where we are today. So back in January of 2021, the board approved the proposed fiscal year 2022-2026 capital improvement program. And those projects have already been programmed in the Regional Transportation Improvement Program through SANDAG. On March 8th, 2021, the executive committee received a presentation from the executive director on the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget guidance and the strategic areas of focus. And on March 30th, the Performance Administration Finance Committee also received an update on the fiscal year 2022 operating budget process and some of the key issues for consideration. On April 5th, 2021, the Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee received details on the proposed fiscal year 2022 service implementation plan, which included ridership projections and different levels of service that we provided in the upcoming fiscal year and the next 10 years. On April 22nd, the board received again guidance from the executive director on the at a more detailed level on the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget and the different areas for which the district will be focusing its effort in the next upcoming fiscal year. On April 22nd, also the board received a presentation from staff regarding the proposed new rail operations and facilities maintenance contracts business model. Under this model, the Coaster and Springer rail operations and maintenance will transition to NCTD at the end of fiscal year 2022 with full implementation in fiscal year 2023. And the facilities maintenance contracts will transition towards the end of fiscal year 2023 for the which will effectively increase the level of staffing for NCTD. Also, on May 6th, the Performance Administration and Finance Committee received an overview of the proposed fiscal year budget, which provided more details on the assumptions for revenue expenses, as well as actual amounts. So before we get started with the detailed numbers, it is important to note that within the budget process, there are multiple assumptions that are utilized to build up the revenues and the expenditures. So to get started on the fair revenue side, our fair revenue is estimated based on the level of ridership that's projected through our service implementation plan. Within the assumption for fiscal year 2022, we used FY19 as the baseline. We made the assumption that for the first half, we will have approximately 60% of the levels that we had on FY19. And also for the second half, we would have about 75%. On the last meeting for the Performance Administration Finance Committee, there were some questions regarding the assumptions that were used for revenue and what would happen in the event that those ridership levels will not materialize. So later in this presentation, you will see that potential scenario, which will still demonstrate that NCTD is able to achieve a 5-year balanced budget. Within the assumptions for ridership and fair revenue, it's important to note the one significant assumption that was utilized was the full reopening of the economy on June 15, based on California meeting certain conditions. Within the plan, we are also being very positive and optimistic on increasing ridership for Coaster. The pre-pandemic service level will be restored this month, and we are planning for increased frequencies in October of this calendar year. This table illustrates the comparison of the proposed fiscal year 2022 ridership compared to the prior fiscal years, as well as to the initial proposed forecast that was provided to the Marketing Service Plan and Business Development Committee in March. So as you can see, we are amending our forecast to increase our total ridership for FY22 compared to the initial forecast by about 19%. However, it's important to note that the majority of the increase in ridership will come from coaster. And as we have shown in prior presentations, it is critical that coaster ridership increases, because even though they don't carry the most rider in the system, they do bring a significant amount of revenues that are utilized to offset the cost for the Springer and Breeze service. Even if we are more optimistic to where we were back in the presentation that we made to the Marketing Service Planning and Business Development Committee, we are still looking at service levels that are under 31% compared to where we were in fiscal year 2019. Other assumptions within revenue is that Amtrak has reduced their number of daily trips on the Lausanne corridor. So as a result of that reduction in the number of trips, we are looking at reduced maintenance fees reimbursements for NCTD. We're looking at about approximately more than 50% reduction on those reimbursements. A significant line item within the operating and capital budget are the funding that we receive from the Federal Transit Administration. So those funds are apportioned through the Federal Register, and those funds can only be used for either capital projects or for preventive maintenance activities. One item to note is that CARES Act funding. This is an award that was made back in March of 2020. We are still going to be able to carry over more funds for the upcoming fiscal year. The original apportionment to NCTD was approximately $95 million. Most of those funding had been spent through FY20 and FY21. However, we will still have approximately $25 million that we can carry over to FY 2022. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 that was just recently enacted. Through that action, NCTD was allocated approximately $60 million, and we're going to be able to use those funds all the way from fiscal year 22 all the way through 26. Other sources of revenue for the district come from revenue generated through sales taxes and taxes on diesel and fuel. And those are State Transit Assistance, Transportation Development Act, and Transnet. The STA funds, which are derived from the sales tax on diesel and vehicle fees, those are provided by the State Controller's Office. So those allocations have already been published, and they were incorporated in our operating budget. TDA and Transnet, those are sales tax derived. For TDA, those estimates are provided by the county auditor, and the Transnet forecast is provided by SANDAC, and both of them are allocated to NCT based on the population that North County has in the region, which was 29% in January 2020. And January 2020 was the basis utilized for that allocation. And so NCTD will be receiving 29%. And now moving to expenses, within the significant assumptions incorporated in the budget is that we are including the phased transition of our rail operations and maintenance support staff. That staffing will come into NCT at the end of June 2022, with support staff coming a little bit earlier to be able to support that transition, and that will occur in early and mid FY22. With once the full transition takes into place, which will be in June 2022, we're looking at an increase of 112 full-time equivalents. And we have also incorporated within our operating budget merit increases in September and October for eligible employees. For contracts and purchase transportation and facility maintenance, purchase transportation is our largest item in our budget. These contracts are adjusted every year based on the consumer price index for the region. For the rail operations contract, that adjustment is 1.5%. For the facilities contract, that's pending the final CPI index for until June of this year. but for the budget purposes, we have incorporated a 3% CPI. And within the bus contract, it's a combination of both the CPI and the wages agreed upon from the collective contractors' bargaining agreements. For this fiscal year, we anticipate increases in our fuel prices. As everyone is probably aware from your day-to-day, and if you go to a gas station, you have probably noticed that fuel prices have gone up significantly. So for this coming fiscal year, we have budgeted a 23% increase in the cost of fuel compared to the fiscal year 2021 budget, as well as an increase on the CNG, which is compressed natural gas. That's the fuel that's used for a bus fleet. We have also assumed higher pricing by about 9%. Within the fuel cost, we've also incorporated the additional fuel that's needed to for the service increases for the coaster that are planned for October of this year. For liability insurance costs, we're looking at an increase of almost 57% to our actual cost for fiscal year 2021. We currently don't know what those costs are going to be, but we anticipate that they will have a significant increase due to a couple of reasons. One of them mean that the insurance market continues to be a challenging market with a limited number of underwriters, as well as increases on the number of claims, which has been affected any agency that's looking to buy insurance in the markets. Also, NCTD has been subject to the increase of the rail liability coverage, and that was increased from $295 to $323 million. And that liability coverage is mandated at the federal level. Other increases within our budget are related to positive trend control. The positive trend control is currently in the final implementation phase from the project standpoint. The majority of those costs had been funded through the capital project, but as we near completion, as funds from the capital project are being spent and encumbered, we project that for the second half of the coming fiscal year, we'll have approximately $1.4 million of expenses related to PTC that we did not have before. Other professional services are also budgeted to increase. As Matt mentioned, we are making significant investments for studies that will allow us to have better visibility on the market and allow us to develop those business strategies for service improvements and increasing ridership. There's also studies that are going to be dedicated for revenue generating projects, which include real estate redevelopment and naming rights studies. Other expenses that are what we call expenses that generate revenues are those studies that are needed to support discretionary grant applications. Those includes the Songs Double Track and the Spring Double Track. We have made these investments before that have allowed us to bring extra dollars to the district. One of those few examples are the ones that were done for the TCEP award that was just awarded few months ago, that funded a program of projects of almost $200 million, as well as the FRA signal modernization. So a lot of time these studies are necessary for us to be able to be competitive. So this is what we call investments. And then we also have other professional services that we have to incur for the maintenance of way, which includes Loma Alta Creek. And we also anticipate some increased security costs from the law enforcement from the San Diego Sheriff's Department, so they can address some of the security issues that we're having at some locations and transit centers. And one thing to note for the upcoming fiscal year budget is that there is a transfer of expenses between our purchase transportation contract and our materials line item, and you will see more of these as we come into the next coming fiscal year, as we transition our rail contract. The technical supports and materials management contract for materials used to be reported under purchase transportation, but now those are being reported as professional services. So as I noted earlier, the board approved the capital improvement program back in January, but this is just to provide a quick recap of what are the big investments that we're looking at for the next 5 years. Those include the San Dieguito double track, the Breeze zero emission hydrogen fuel cell buses project. We also have to continue funding the coaster service expansion equipment. The majority of that money is coming from Transnet, and those have already been programmed in the Sandag regional plan. Most of the funding will come from 23 and 24. We also are purchasing the last 2 replacement locomotives for Siemens. And we are also investing on coaster new available cars and overhauls. And $9 million are programmed for Delmar Plus 5. And this amount was used as a match to the $36 million that was awarded under the TSEP program. The following table provides a summary of the investments that we're making in the next 5 years based on a scope of work. As you can see, the majority of the investments for NCT are in the replacement of rail rolling stock. Given NCT is responsible for state of good repair projects, so that's as expected. So we'll be making investments in replacing our bus vehicles, our rail vehicles, as well as bringing up our bridges in a state of good repair, which includes the Delmar Plus 5. One thing to note is that from the original capital improvement program that was approved by the board in January, there's one revision, and that revision is resulting in the decrease on the FY22 budget as a result of the reduced service frequencies from Amtrak on the Lausanne corridor. The amount of funding for that program is going to be of approximately $1.5 million for FY22. Those monies have been originally programmed for the signal modernization project. We need to fund the project since there is a significant amount of TRCP and FRA funding attached. So therefore, the gap will be covered by funds from the Bridge 257.2. In the next slide, this provides the 5-year plan, which basically is the estimated revenues that we anticipate the district will receive in the next 5 years, and how those funding is going to be allocated between the capital program, between preventive maintenance expenses and operating expenses. As you can see, what's going to be very unique to this 5-year plan to where we were in prior years is the significant amount of funding that we are going to receive from the federal government. And that's a combination of the CARES Act and the ARPA funds that we're going to receive. You also see the other large item within our budget are the local grants. And local grants represent the funding that we receive from TDA and Transnet from sales taxes. We envision that we will be balanced in the next 5 years with a small surplus in FY26, with the surplus being attributed for the most part to the reduction in our capital program. As you can see, we are going from $43 million in FY22 to $12 million in FY26. And more than likely, any surpluses will be reinvested within our capital program. Any long-term obligations related to the Sprinter debt repayment, as well as the payment on our unfunded pension liability, those will be paid from our net assets. In this table is the operating budget summary for the upcoming fiscal year. Without going into too much details, it compares on how we were back in FY19, FY20 versus our forecast for FY21. The majority of the funding will come from the federal grants and local grants. And the largest item in our budget is for purchase transportation, followed by professional services, and third by salaries, wages, and employee benefits. So salaries, wages, and employee benefits include approximately $1.3 million related to the mobilization costs for the transition of the rail contracts at the end in June 2022. So circling back to the my initial comments on the service implementation plan that was initially presented to the MISBIDA committee and to where we are today, we have reached out to other agencies through a survey to collect some data and try to figure out what assumptions they're utilizing for their upcoming fiscal year. One of the things that we notice is that there's really not a simple answer. Each agency is a little bit different. Some agencies are not planning to restore service level to pre-pandemic levels. So it's very difficult to have apples to apples comparison. NCD has plans to restore service. So we are incorporating within our ridership forecast that restoration of service, but there's quite a few agencies out there that do not have plans to restore service. Therefore, their ridership should remain low. However, as we gather more and more data, we are going to continue doing these surveys. We'll have more data available as we plan for our next coming service implementation plan. And any updates will be provided to our board through our quarterly financial reporting. So this is what we call the scenario under the initial forecast provided to the Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee. This will be under the scenario that we don't get the ridership that we have in our proposed budget. So as you can see, the fiscal impact is really on fare passengers, with the majority of that impact being from coaster. But what we wanted to demonstrate through this table is that even under that scenario, NCTD is still able to achieve that 5-year balanced budget. Really what happens is that FY26, we're just looking at a reduction on our surplus from $10 million to $5 million. So the real impact is about $5 million reduction in fares under the more pessimistic scenario. This table provides a recap of what are the largest cost drivers within our operating budget. In the first column, those are baseline increases. And then the second column are one-time expenses. Baseline increases are those expenses that are for existing services that are adjusted for either, forecasted increases in fuel prices or more costs associated with securing liability insurance or the CPI adjustment or positive trend control. So those are expenses that are not unique to FY22, but will continue carrying over to the next few years. One-time expenses are one-time investments or activities that will occur only in FY22. And as I mentioned earlier, the majority of those are going to be related to market analysis and business strategy development, as well as the studies for real estate redevelopment, discretionary grants applications, as well as some planning grants. We also have some COVID supplies and cleaning within the budget, and that's about $332,000 for this coming fiscal year. This chart provides a recap of the sources for our operating budget for the next coming fiscal year. As you can see, the majority of our funding will come from two sources: the local grants, which is the TD and Transnet. Those are sales tax dependent, and federal grants, with the majority of that funding coming from FTA funding for preventive maintenance expenses and CARES Act and ARP funds. This is the same, a further breakdown of what those operating grant revenue sources are. As you can see, the three major sources will be TDA, the federal ARPA funds, and the federal CARES Act funds. And in this pie chart, we see the breakdown of our operating expenses. Our major expense for NCT is purchase transportation, and then makes up approximately 47% of our total operating expenses, followed by professional services at 22%, and then our salaries, wages, and benefits at 14%. This table here, it's a further breakdown of what those professional services are. They are broken down by division, meaning that the divisions that carry most of the costs are associated with development services, and the major contracts are for facilities maintenance and also for sheriff's dedicated law enforcement. So next steps for the budget process. On June 1st, we'll be releasing our operating budget and our capital program document for public review and comment. We will also be posting our classification and compensation schedule, the right-of-way cost recovery fee schedule, our service implementation plan, and our disadvantaged business enterprise goal. The board will reconvene on June 17, 2021 for public hearing and for adoption of the fiscal year 2022 operating budget, fiscal year 2022-2026 capital improvement program, the fiscal year 2022-2031 service implementation plan, and all the related budget documents listed above. So that concludes my presentation. So I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Yoon, for putting that together. That's a lot of detail, and I know you've been working hard on it, and I know I very much appreciate it. I'm sure the rest of the board does as well. And you know, this is intended to be a summary presentation. The next meeting will be taking some action, but we want to provide feedback if anybody has any. One question that I would have more of Matt than Yoon is, we have historically had a fairly significant deficit in state of good repair projects that were unfunded, that we were able to fund. So I'm assuming that's still the case.
Yes, sir. And in fact, you know, it's one of the major issues is that particularly those most expensive projects that were contemplated to be funded through the Transnet program of projects are on hold. And so we are well north of in excess of 600-700 million. And you go down the whole list into the billion realm of shortfall of funding for state of good repair projects. Some of those projects, yes, carry some capacity enhancing, but if you consider, for example, Bridge 243, which is the Fairgrounds Bridge, that project is all in about a $220 million project. We got enough money to fund phase one of that project, but we have no money to be able to fund phase two. The project is currently shovel ready, but the region lacks any money to compete for discretionary funds. And so what we have done, and I know you've been around for this discussion, Tony, is in this budget, we've committed pretty much every dollar that we have to fund the 200 and something million dollars of programs that were supported by the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which supports projects like the stabilization of the Delmar Bluffs, phase one of San Diego Bridge project, Downtown Convention Center, and other projects. So yes, that deficit remains big. I wanted to highlight a bigger coming issue is zero emission buses. Are going to cost us a lot more than I think was really reflected today. One of the things that we're presently working on, and it won't make you happy, is working on trying to get more on-site technical assistance for the maintenance of those vehicles and for workforce development. That may be a pretty expensive proposition, but if you look at the performance of those buses and the failure rate of those buses, it's something we're likely going to have to do so that the folks who are most vulnerable can have much more reliable public transportation services. That's a big worry. Fuel costs associated with zero emission buses, significantly more than what we spend today. We're going to look at a grant for on-source fueling of hydrogen, significantly more money and energy consumption than what we spend today. I think it's important for the board to understand this whole discussion that's occurring right now about inflation is real. It's real in terms of commodity. It's real in terms of wages. So this is absolutely a time as we go to adopt a budget. I said to you a couple of weeks ago, is that my next focus is going to be cost cutting so that we can then create capacity for some things that we're going to have to do and plan for what I see as potential risk down the line for everyone in terms of inflation impacts.
And that table that identified significant expenditures for rail locomotive, that is an effort that's been underway for several years, and we are essentially replacing all the locomotives in our fleet, which had reached the end of their useful life. We, the maintenance teams had managed to use enough baling wire to keep them running, but it was well past time to replace those. And our next focus will be on the bus rolling stock. And we'll be dealing with that issue that you just dealt with, which is zero emission buses that are maybe more expensive than what we're seeing here.
Yes, they're definitely more expensive than what we spend for the CNG buses. Obviously, we are well ahead of the plan for replacement, moving in towards zero emission bus. Just as a reminder for you, Tony, and for the board, by the time we get to midsummer, we will have reduced the average age of our bus fleet from 11 years to 4. And so remember, Tony, we were trying to do the two-step of getting the locomotives, and we deferred the bus program, but we were able to do both. And so we're going to be in a good posture, but the challenge is going to be is that those buses are significantly more expensive to maintain and operate. And we're going to have to spend even more money associated with training, workforce development, so that we can ensure that the service is reliable for our passengers.
Okay, in the little Zoom participant window, I see no raised hands. So that would mean the robust feedback is thank you very much, Ewan. You did a great job. Oh, Vice Chair Edson has now raised her hand. But you got to unmute.
I thought I'd raised it and I hadn't. I just wanted to do what you're doing right now, which is to thank Yoon for doing an amazing job in very clearly presenting all of this information to us, because it is a lot of information, but also for following up on the PATH's question and providing that information as well. So thank you.
Okay. No vote is required. Anthony, were there any public comments on this item?
No, sir.
Very good. Thank you to staff. Moving on to item number
Board members. Thank you.
Pardon me? Okay. Item number 19, moving on, we are going to get an update on the Carlsbad Village Trench Alternatives Analysis from Linda Culp, the principal planner at Sandag, who may be giving us her last presentation.
Thank you, Chair Kranz, members of the board. Linda Culp, happy to be here with you one more time, this time giving you an update on our Carlsbad Village Trench Alternatives Analysis study. We completed this study along with NCTD and the City of Carlsbad in 2020. We looked at grade separation alternatives in the Carlsbad Village area, and that's consistent with the programmatic environmental document that was completed by Caltrans and the Federal Railroad Administration in 2009. And that called for both, that both at grade and grade separated alternatives could be studied moving forward. Next slide. So just a word on the at-grade double track project. Next slide. This area of the village section of the Low-Sand Corridor is currently single track. This project at the at-grade option adds 1 mile of double tracking. It extends the station platforms. It would construct a pedestrian underpass right there at the Carlsbad Village Station and other improvements. Our current cost estimate was $87 million. We did progress the design to 30%. So we completed preliminary engineering and an environmental document, but currently have no additional funding for that shortfall of that grade. But a few years ago, next slide, the City of Carlsbad did approach us and NCTD about studying a grade separated option or a trench alternative, which would lower the railroad tracks underneath several of the arterial streets. So this 2020 report summarizes the two alternatives, one short trench, one long trench. And you can see some detail there. And basically, if you're on the train and you're heading south, you leave Carlsbad Village Station, the short trench stops north of Tamarack. The long trench stops after or south of Tamarack. So if you want to remember that way. There are also some common components to each of the alternatives. One, we would construct a double track segment of the corridor. Similar to the at-grade option. We would need at least one temporary or what we call shoe fly track along the east side of the railroad so that we could keep the operations open while the trench was being constructed. The depths between 25 and 30 feet below the street level. We need about 55 feet across for the double track for maintenance, other drainage improvements in the trench. Both alternatives do replace the railroad bridge over Buena Vista Lagoon in the northern part of the project area. And it would also require reconstructing that Carlsbad Boulevard overpass there just north of the station. Next slide. So what this graphic shows you is at the top is Buena Vista Lagoon, and then we work our way south past Tamarack. And as I mentioned, that long trench, the difference is that it does grade separate that southern end near Tamarack Avenue. And has several overpasses included in both alternatives, but one difference is at Chestnut. For both alternatives, we propose that being a bicycle pedestrian only. But for the long trench, we could put vehicles on that bridge if that was deemed something that we wanted to do. It's just if we're shortening that trench, the railroad needs to be coming up, and the clearance on that only necessitates a bicycle or pedestrian bridge. Next slide. So this is a typical section of the trench, and if you would be standing in that trench just south of the station, but you're looking north, and so the station's kind of ahead of you, you can see that we would have a double tracked segment here, so 2 trains here, and then along the left-hand side or the east side, I'm sorry, west side would be area for a maintenance road, and then there's other drainage improvements. There's a typical cross section. Next slide. But there are some things that we need to be aware of as the design progresses. And one is that there are a lot of utilities in this area. There's a storm drain, a major sewer line, gas utilities, electric utilities. So we need to be aware of those as we're designing. All of the trench would be below groundwater level. So we'd need to seal the trench, and we'd have to take that into consideration with the design. There'd be pumping needed, that kind of thing. And as I mentioned, we would want to keep the railroad operating, of course, while we're constructing the trench. So we'd need at least one temporary track. And we need to be aware of the vertical clearance at all the overpasses in the available right of way. And as I'll mention, that some gets a little constrained in some of the area of the project area. Next slide. Need to be aware of some constructability issues here. And one, as I mentioned, very important with all of our capital improvement projects on the railroad is to keep the railroad operating. So we would need that temporary track, station platforms. We see those on the east side of a trench. And so that would be removing on a temporary basis some of the parking, for example, at the station. We'd maintain on-street traffic. We'd be moving a lot of earth, and it would take us a little while. We, at this level, estimate about 8 to 12 months. And we are right now at this level looking at about 4-year construction duration. Next slide. But there are many benefits, and the project study report, the analysis documents these. And first and foremost being the improved roadway circulation, lots of people on the east side of the railroad, and lots of beach access and other destinations on the west side, as would be benefits to public safety and first responders. Mentioned railroad operations, so we'd be building a double track segment, so increasing the capacity. And then the study also documents a number of environmental benefits, for example, reduction in traffic and congestion, and then economic benefits as well. Next slide. So we put together a project development team as we normally do. That was Sandag, NCTD, and the City of Carlsbad staff. We came up with these 6 items that were very important to us when we evaluated each of the alternatives. And the important things were to minimize the impact to the operations, environmental impacts, making sure that community acceptance was important, and you see the others as well. Next slide. And so our team, led by T.Y. Lin and BRG on the design side, developed these criteria. We weighted them, we scored each. And through this technical evaluation, we did score the long trench a little bit higher than the short trench alternative. And then one variation to a short trench that could be explored more is that, while that that Tamarack Avenue crossing would remain at grade, perhaps improvements could be made so that it could be a quiet zone in the future. So that was also brought up and suggested at some of our outreach events. Next slide. We did hold a public workshop a year ago, November, very well attended on a very rainy night, as I remember. We made a lot of presentations to area community groups, and the city of Carlsbad also launched an online survey that we were able to gather additional opinions through that. And I'd say if we could summarize all of that would be support for the long trench alternative, but a lot of questions about funding, as all of us may have. It's just, you know, what sort of funding would be needed, how much, and then in the future, who would be paying for what. Next slide. In terms of those cost estimates, you can see for a short trench, last year we estimated around $250 million to say for the short trench, long trench closer to $400 million. And those are based on the design criteria that NCTD has in terms of vertical clearance from the top of the rail up to the bottom of any overpass. And then NCTD staff seemed to indicate it, if we could relax that or get a deviation from that standard, then there could be some cost savings with either of those alternatives. And you can see those on the bottom table. Next slide. The city of Carlsbad also put together some very nice renderings to kind of help the community and help all of us kind of visualize this. And so I'll just show you a photo of Carlsbad Village, and we're looking north, so you can see the historic train station there up on the top right. Single track today, but if you click again, the next slide would show you a possible rendering of that, where we have a 2-track trench. You see the 2 coaster trains passing one another there underneath the roadway, bicycle pedestrian improvements. Next slide would be another alternative. And the difference here, we're still looking at that same intersection, but just north of the road, you can see the potential for a community park there over top of that trench. So that was something that was important for the city to think about in the future as well. Next slide is down at Chestnut, down on the south end of the corridor. And we're standing on the east of the railroad and we're looking west towards the beach. And this is the existing condition. You can just barely see the railroad track there in the middle. Next slide. And this is a possible rendering of what that bicycle pedestrian bridge might look like at Chestnut and the connections to the coastal rail trail. Next slide. So we have met a couple of times with the city of Carlsbad. Last July, we gave the city council an update. For example, we currently do not have funding identified for any future phases in terms of environmental or design or construction, but we do have a corridor study underway. We were here at your board last month, and we talked mainly about Del Mar tunnels and Miramar Hill tunnels, but we want to look at the entire corridor later this year, and this would be one of the projects that we would be looking at in that list of improvements. Next slide. So with that, I am happy to stop and take any comments or questions that you might have. Thanks.
Okay, Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for the presentation. And as alluded to by our chair, congratulations on your upcoming retirement. I learned about this at Lausanne earlier this week, and I'm very excited for you, and I'll really miss your presentations because they're pretty terrific. I have a couple questions. On slide 68, you mentioned the shoe fly track and the need for at least one shoe fly track. Would these all be within the NCTD right-of-way, or would they require any acquisition of private property?
Yeah, that's a great question. Remind me of something I left out, but it would not require the temporary shoe fly. We don't believe would require additional right-of-way. However, that long trench alternative that grade separates Tamarack, because the right-of-way is very narrow down there in that area, would require, we believe, about 3 properties down there in the Tamarack area.
Okay, and so when I was looking at the slides, and I wrote myself a note about open trench versus closed trench, but it looks like there's a combination, maybe depending on whether it's long trench or short trench. Is the short trench all open trench and the long trench a combination, or is it pretty mixed up still?
Yeah, at this level, at this 10%, we envision it open, an open trench. That one example, the city might be interested in perhaps closing a part to put a park, for example. That was in the village area, so that was one example. But for the most part, designed as open.
If you do it there, could you come to Solana Beach and maybe close over part of ours and put a park in? Because we're a little park space deficient here. And then on slide 77, you mentioned 24 feet of vertical clearance is normally required, and that you're looking at whether, I think I heard whether that could be relaxed. And that's something curious for me because of the talks of, moving the corridor to different types of trains that might require some catenary, even if it's tiny catenary, not giant catenary. How does that work?
I think, well, the standard right now, the design criteria right now is 26 feet. And so that's from the top of the rail down the trench up until the bottom of any overpass. And so, NCTD staff at the time we were doing this study indicated that we could probably relax that a little bit if we had a deviation approved, which is a process that we go through if we can't meet that kind of standard. But that is reserved for any future electrification, double stack freight trains or something like that. So that goes into part of that criteria.
Thank you. Double stack was my next question and you answered it. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Bhat Patel.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And I know you've been to Carlsbad and presented us with this information as well. Just from that time period and now, I know obviously we've had a change in administration. And so just wanted to check in to see, where we're at with potentially advocating for or looking for more funding sources. I know you mentioned we haven't necessarily found any new funding sources just yet, but since we do have a new administration and we do have more transit and infrastructure related funds coming out of that administration, wondering where we're at in terms of seeking those funds.
Yeah, great question. And, as the last item, some of the comments made on the last item from staff, there is a big list of improvement projects, and they range from state of good repair to capacity projects like this one. And I think what we tend to do is get projects shovel ready and they're in a position to compete very well for either federal funds or state funds, whatever it might be. And I think we just need to do so for this one, but we would have it on the list is the big plus here. And then any funds that might be available come, for example, for a preliminary engineering or environmental, this would be, I think, a pretty good candidate. But we do have other projects are probably more shovel ready at this point.
Okay.
Board Member Gaskellin.
Linda, thank you for a really clear presentation. As usual, we're going to miss you. I'm curious about the short versus the long trench and whether building a short trench precludes a long trench. Is this something that can be kind of a stage design that a long trench is still possible in the future with some sort of design of a short trench now?
I would, with my planner hat on, I would think potentially I would just see this as a pretty significant project that we would likely want to decide on which one of these we wanted. And if we're going to go to this expense, to do it well once,
right,
that sort of thing. But I could definitely put that on the list for the design team to think about in the future.
And related to that, the cost to cover upfront versus later. Do you have to spend extra to prepare for having that park later? I heard Board Member Edson remind us that Solana Beach has a trench, and boy, imagine if even half of that, a quarter of that were covered up. We'd have an amazing park, and any park that benefits Solana Beach also benefits Del Mar. What does it take to cover up later without having thought about it in advance? Is it harder?
I don't know. I don't know. That's probably another question for the design team.
Okay, last little question. Could you remind me, to what extent does this speed up time from Oceanside to San Diego to do this trenching?
We did not run any travel time analysis on this project just yet. We will look at through the low sand study we were talking about last month, how we could maybe potentially design this for higher speed service. So we didn't look at any travel time savings on this one just yet.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I seem to recall that this there was a planning grant, a $10 million planning grant for this study. Is that just something I imagined, or was that true?
For the at-grade preliminary engineering environmental, we did receive a small FRA grant, but for the trench study, it's been funded by a combination of SANDAG and the city of Carlsbad. So no grant funds on this one just yet.
And I think that on the City of Carlsbad website, they talk about, possible construction around the 2030 timeframe. Is that how you would see this process going? If they decided to fund it and they were going to build it and hope for grant money and that sort of thing, is that about the timeframe you think it would take?
Yeah, is in the alternatives analysis report, we do talk pending funding, how long each of these stages would take. And remember, I mentioned that we thought construction alone would take about 4 years.
Okay. And I appreciate you thinking about the quiet zone if you do the short trench for that intersection. I think that we should, Del Mar, Encinitas, Carlsbad, and Oceanside should work closer together to create a quiet zone from the Orange County border down to throughout San Diego. San Diego has a 12 crossing quiet zone, and we really should be focused on making that happen throughout our region, because quality of life is significantly impacted by the sounding of horns. So I don't know, I might have to talk to Matt about what his recommendations are for kicking off that conversation, but Oceanside has already begun the process. I don't know if their whole city will be quiet zone. Cardiff at Chesterfield has one, and we're very interested in doing the rest of our city. We have some challenges on the north end that Carlsbad could help out with. So it's my hope that we can at one point collaborate on that. So I see no other raised hands. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, sir.
All right. As I mentioned at the Sandag meeting, Linda, as a resident of Encinitas, I envy you your opportunity to retire, because there's so many great things to do in Encinitas. It's too bad we couldn't have had you design this project for our city before you retired, but we're not as rich as Carlsbad, so it didn't happen. But in the meantime, all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
With that, we're on to item number 20. Sean Lufborough, are you still there?
I'm there, Board Chair. Thank you.
Very good. An update on the North County Transit District's COVID-19 vaccination survey.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members of the board. I'd like to take this opportunity to present the results of a survey that we did for NCTD, as well as our contracted staff. That was in March of this year, really focused on the intentions of folks related to the COVID-19 vaccination and what their intentions were, whether they were going to get vaccinated or not, and if not, why. So I'll briefly go over the survey results. I'll talk about the total number of folks that we had participated, and then we'll compare those numbers with some of the national polls that have been done as far as the results of people in different crafts and their vaccination status. And then we'll conclude with some next steps on what we think is best to try to capture some of these folks that may be on the fence on whether they want to choose to have a vaccination or not. So here we go. Here's the overall responsiveness. So out of the total district population, which is almost 900, we did receive about 70% in the response. So about 90% for NCTD. a little over 58% for MV, and then 78% for Bombardier. Of those respondents, there's the totals again broken down. We did have 257 for MV. Again, that's our largest contractor, so we're glad to see that they chose to respond with as many employees that they did. And then we have 133 for Bombardier and then 127 for NCTD. So that's just the amount that responded. Again, that's roughly 70% of the total workforce. The first question was, do you intend on receiving the COVID-19 vaccine? Of those folks that did respond, nearly 70% answered yes, with approximately 359. We did receive about 15% of no, and then roughly 15% chose not to answer. Specifically broken down by group, again, for Bombardier, roughly 58% said they intended to be vaccinated, with roughly 18% saying no and 24% choosing not to answer. MV was a little higher at about 70%, and again, roughly 15 and 15 for the no and not responding, as well as NCTD, slightly higher with about 83%, and again, a little less than 10 for both, either no or choosing not to answer. So overall, we had a good amount of respondents for the survey, and again, roughly 70% across the board said they intended on getting the vaccine at the time. Again, this was back in March. As far as the no responses, there's kind of a summary of the answers that we received as far as why people were choosing not to get vaccinated. Sort of the top ones had to do with the vaccine was created too quickly to be trustworthy, and potential concerns about the side effects based on that vaccination. We also had some onesies, twosies on other ones, but that was kind of the focus on the no reasons. And so what we did is we tried to respond to that to make sure that folks had the appropriate education and resources to make an informed decision. So we did send out all the quick fact guides for all those different vaccinations for the main three. We also talked about the benefits of vaccination. So we tried to respond to that to make sure the employees, again, had the appropriate information to make the best decision for them. As far as how our survey results compared against national numbers, so you can see the bar graph on the left there was surveys taken nationally at various times throughout the pandemic, starting as early as May, and then wrapping up about the same time we did our survey in February 21. Overall, it ranged between 72 and 69%, and it had a dip in the middle there. So again, what the results we see were on par with what we saw, what has been observed in national polls as far as the overall percentage of folks that at least intended to get the survey. And again, same thing as far as the no's, very similar responses with the national surveys, concerned about the side effects, and they felt that the vaccine was done too quickly. So based on all that, what NCTD intends to do next is to really focus on that communication with the employees and making sure that they are making an informed decision, really open up the lines, make sure if they have questions, we can answer them. Again, provide the fact sheets if available, and then highlight again the benefits of being vaccinated and really try to push that messaging through. We will follow up with an additional survey later on, late summer or early fall, to sort of see the results and see if there's any significant change based on some of our communication effects. And again, I think really that's our goal, is to make sure, regardless of what the decision is, we just want to make sure that they have the correct information, and that if there is something that we can help them with, either answering questions or additional resources, we're able to provide that for the employees. That's kind of all I had as a quick summary. Open to any questions from anybody on the line. Thank you.
Board Member Gasterlin.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute. Thank you so much for this presentation. It jives with the numbers and the reasons in the University of California health system. And I wonder if you might add to your messaging. I saw that 11 of the people who had answered said that they had already had COVID. And what I'm being told is that the antibodies that your system develops when you have COVID are different from the antibodies that you develop when you have the vaccine. The vaccine presents the spike protein, and COVID itself presents everything. So the vaccine induces a strong response. So the recommendations I'm hearing is, even if you've had COVID, get the vaccine as well, because it helps. Have you considered adding a few of these other messages? That's one that may be very important to get people who might think they're protected, but they could be even better protected.
Absolutely. That's actually in discussion. So there are several web pages and resources that have been provided. Specifically from the FTA, we've had 2 conference calls within the last week, really discussing about how to promote vaccinations and what that messaging should be. So we have plenty of resources from them as well as from the CDC, but absolutely we'll make sure that that's part of the messaging. Again, there is some misinformation that's out there. We want to make sure that the correct information is out. So we will absolutely make sure that that's part of it.
Thank you. And one more question. Have you thought about testimonials? For example, I'd be able to say, hey, I got it, had a fever for a day, felt so much better afterward. And wow, now I really feel happy to be able to get out there safely. My 84-year-old father had it and his arm was sore for a week, but boy, he's really relieved to have the vaccine. Testimonials could make a difference. Have you thought about that?
Absolutely. In fact, informally, as the chief of safety, as I walk around, I'm kind of an informal testimonial. I was able to receive it prior to some of the other employees based on my military status as a veteran. So I was able, and I fielded a lot of questions from folks. Did it hurt? What happened? Did your arm fall off? Did you, whatever it was. And again, so I presented that, but you're absolutely right. If we could capture some of those for some people and really relay what the positive, what it has, of either, and again, I have neighbors that are elderly. They were very concerned themselves. They got vaccinated. It really helped them. Once they found out we were vaccinated, we're able to connect. So there's certainly things outside the office as well that sort of build those bridges and sort of rekindle those connections with folks. So I think all of that could be captured and can be part of it. So absolutely.
Great. And I'll volunteer for an interview.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the report, Sean. And good questions, Councilmember or Mayor Gasterlin. So touching on one of the things that Mayor Gasterlin mentioned, there was a news report recently about a number of New York Yankees players who had previously had COVID or had the COVID vaccine coming down with COVID. I think that was really interesting information. And I do have a number of people who live around here or contractors or that sort of thing who are saying that same thing. Oh, well, I already had it, so I'm not going to catch it. And I do think that that's something really to address. But my question is, is there anything that breaks down the number of employees who have been vaccinated by the position that they perform? In other words, are they public-facing employees? Because I think that that's important when we're trying to address safety with the public so that they understand, yeah, it's safe to come back and ride because, we're at that 80% threshold or whatever threshold it is that we're trying to reach for herd immunity to have people feel more comfortable.
So the survey was done anonymously because we really wanted the feedback. So we can't really identify which employees other than the contract. So we can certainly promote as an agency and with the contractor, 70% of our folks intended or have received the vaccine. So I think we can cycle messaging about that, but I don't know that we can get specific enough as far as specific craft employees to say, hey, this percentage of this position, whether it be an operator or a driver, we're not going to have that data, but I think we can certainly promote our success and the numbers that we have received from this to say we are promoting it. This is what we see as the intent, and it's in line with what we're seeing nationally. So that itself is a success. So I think that's how we would sort of address that question.
Okay. And have we considered doing a stipend or doing any sort of sweetener to convince people who haven't been vaccinated or to reward those who have been vaccinated so that others might follow?
So Jacob Gould will answer that question. So Jacob, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, Joel. This is Jacob from General Counsel's office. So we looked at 3 sort of threshold questions that popped up with this and seem to be popping up kind of all over the country, which is, can we incentivize employees to get vaccinated? The general answer to that is yes. But because of state and federal regulations, there are certain restrictions that are put on that. One sort of has to be we have to be mindful of those that for whatever reason cannot or do not want to get one. And so it has to be fairly administered across the board. The question has come up even, can we require folks to receive that? Right now, no other agencies are doing so. I wouldn't want to be the first to do that, although the CDC and DFEH have all said, yes, an employer, can do that, but there's some fairly high thresholds that have to be met for that. Right now, really the only entities that are doing that are sort of in the healthcare industry. And then, the last one obviously is, can we provide it sort of on site? And we do annually with flu shots. This would be something that would be a likely addition to that program, which is entirely voluntary. But right now, we have not rolled anything out in terms of, a wellness program incentive or anything like that. And we're really just sort of waiting to see kind of how this rolls out with others, because like I said, it is a bit tricky with HIPAA regulations and, the questions that we can ask of folks, and participation in an active program where you're actually asking somebody to do something other than just, attend a seminar or something like that, does carry sort of higher scrutiny than those passive wellness programs. So,
Good information. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Jacob and Sean and Matt, we're seeing things opening up again, and it's in large part because people are being vaccinated. A client that I work for who routinely has conferences, events throughout the country, just recently had their first one, and 800 people showed up. And one of the requirements for attendance was that in order to get your name badge, you had to have a rapid test for COVID. Is that something that we, I have no idea what the cost was for them to administer that kind of testing, but perhaps there's a way that we could, establish that not only are you protected by having the vaccination, but you protect the riders of the transit system. And therefore it's in North County Transit District's interest to know whether you are sick. And certainly the vaccination is one good way, if you can verify that you've been vaccinated, to prove that. And so maybe there's a way that we could have a program whereby those who haven't provided documentation of their vaccination would have to have a rapid test as part of their day at work.
So Tony, this is Jacob again. We've looked into this, and where it's not sort of a state-led program or a private entity that's imposing this on a closed space in which they control, we still have to comply with state and federal law. And so HIPAA, really restricts the questions, health-related questions that we can ask of individuals and especially employees. The Department of Health in California has come out and sort of given us guidelines for vaccinations and requirements there. And really what they've prescribed is that we follow the state and county guidelines as opposed to masks and social distancing at the moment. So, rapid testing for coming to work really isn't on any public entity's radar at the moment. I presume a private company could potentially implement that if they have, a significant purpose to do so. But again, just for a public entity and complying with those state and county regulations, I think that's what we're relying on now. And that's what we've been doing throughout this process.
And just to piggyback, it's important to note. So when Sean did the presentation, there's a high level of vaccination rates already by NCTD employees. The employee group that I think really the discussion is around is the bus operator group. Those employees, those folks don't work for NCTD. So that's another consideration in this. Just for clarity, we offer enticements for employees to complete the survey. We plan to offer another enticement for people to complete the survey. I work very closely with the union, and I think what we're going to do is sit down with the union before we do the next level of survey, make sure that the information that we're going to provide, that the union endorses and gets out to the employees. We really, really want to get this done through people making those decisions. We don't really want to be in the position of knowing or attempting to inquire into people's health status about why they would or would not take a vaccine. It's a very difficult thing. And I can tell you, we've discussed all of those different options. And if you catch me on one day, I could tell you I could go, towards the direction of saying everybody needs to get the vaccine, but it's very perilous, I believe, for us to do that.
Yeah, I suppose the other side of the coin is that many of the riders are going to be vaccinated, and so an infected bus driver, while unfortunate, is certainly less likely to infect people. But it's a tough question, and there's no doubt that vaccinations are controversial. So it's unfortunate because we're trying to emerge from a pandemic, and it's definitely presenting a challenge to reach that proverbial herd immunity. So seeing no other raised hands, it appears, Sean, you're off the hook, done, unless, Anthony, there were any comments or questions or that came for this item.
No, sir.
Okay, no vote required. So thanks, Sean. And we will move on to the executive director's report. Mr. Tucker.
Yes, sir. So I do have a couple of items I do want to report. The first item I do want to report is that NCTD and Metrolink, that we have executed a memorandum of understanding. We are committing in a non-binding agreement to implement some special event services. And I'll just read this paragraph to you all. The parties will design and have agreed upon implement coordinated and seamless services to support mutually agreed upon special events to include, but not limited to, the Major League Baseball playoffs in 2021, Major League Baseball All-Star Game in 2022, National Football League Super Bowl in 2022, 2028 Olympics, and other mutually agreed upon special events. The agreed upon special event services will allow for Metrolink trains to operate as far south as Santa Fe Depot in the city of San Diego, and NCTD trains to operate as far north as Anaheim. The parties will work with other Southern California transportation providers and key stakeholders to ensure a seamless riding experience for customers. So this is a very important step forward. We also agreed to do some marketing and customer service coordination as well as some fare collection system validation coordination. This is a major step forward for the agencies. This is something that we have discussed for a significant period of time, and we are actually making really rapid progress in those discussions. Now, there are a lot of work that needs to be done. Positive train control approvals have to be executed and more detailed operational plans. But the parties agreed that even ahead of what we specified, that we're going to start doing some things so that we can really ensure a seamless transition towards implementing what I would call a more integrated types of services for the public. So big news. So think about it. If we're able to mature this, that we could get into the summer months, that you could have a one-seat ride between San Diego and Disneyland throughout the summer. I think that would be a game changer. So the second thing I did want to mention is that we are working very closely with Senator Feinstein's office and Congressman Levin's office as it related to those directed community projects. We have submitted our projects. It was the hydrogen facility with Congressman Levin, and for Senator Feinstein, we are submitting Bridge 257.2, which is a state of good repair project. Congressman Levin is a little bit ahead of the curve, as is the House of Representatives. So we have been shortlisted to his top 10 list of projects that he has put forward. So if you go to his website, you will see our project. Senator Feinstein is in the early stages, and we just met with them today to give them visual review of Bridge 257.2. We have, I think it's about a $9 to $12 million request for community project funding. So we're continuing in those efforts, making those efforts to see if we can get additional funding. All of that funding does is help us move funding from one capital project to another capital project. So it's a very important part of our strategies to achieve state of good repair and do projects that really benefit our customers. That's my report, Chair.
Thank you. That's some good news. I know the agreement with Metrolink has long been discussed, and so congratulations for finally getting ink to paper for that agreement. When people consider riding by rail to here, there, or wherever, the requirement to get off of one train and onto another sometimes is the key impediment. So that single seat may make a difference, and my hope is that we will promote it well and it will be successful. So thanks for your efforts along those lines. And I think that you were talking with the executive officer of Metrolink to get that deal done before she moved on to be the executive director of Metro.
Absolutely. And as she goes over to Metro, kind of one of the bigger focuses is going to be planning around these major special events. And so we both are committed to work with all of our regional stakeholder partners, because if you think about particularly like the Super Bowl location, that facility is not located in a great place with easy access for anything.
Right.
And so there are going to be multiple locations that are going to require rubber wheel connections from rail. And so one of the things that we're committed to is getting all the stakeholders at the table to develop an integrated transportation program. Because remember, those events like the Super Bowl is not a one-day event. It's actually more than a one-week event. And so part of this is going to be frequency and span of service, making sure that we give people the opportunity to take rail and have those first and last mile connections, but have them throughout the day and the time so that people don't have to take the choice or make a choice to use their automobile.
Great. Board Member Gasterlin, did you have a question for Matt?
I do, Matt. Sorry, I do, Chair Kranz. Matt, it occurs to me as you're talking about the Metrolink that there may be a real opportunity here going forward. You know, it may take a few years, but connecting college campuses. And I'd offer as an example, the New Jersey Transit, outside New York City, connects Princeton, Rutgers, and various other campuses, including connecting to University of Delaware. And here, do we have an opportunity, given the Anaheim connection, to connect UC Irvine with University of Southern California, UCLA, UCSD, San Diego State, and then the community colleges and the Cal State campuses? Is there thinking along those lines?
Yeah, but I would tell you what we've decided to do, that we just think it's important that we take one step at a time. Yeah. And that was kind of one of the key discussions for the staff, is that, yes, there are bigger things that are out there, but this is such a significant step forward. We want to make sure we spend the time to refine these things. But certainly what you're hitting on in terms of campuses, even, on the weekends, if you look at the weekends and the 5, how it's so congested on the weekend, there's got to be lots of opportunities for us to divert people from automobiles to rail if we can provide the types of one-seat rides and connections. So all of those things are on the table. We want to build the momentum. We want to build success and then continue to figure out how far we want to go.
That's great, because a big part of wanting to go by rail, one, if you're a student, you may not have a car, but with hybrid education, COVID has put university level education into a whole new state where you may take a course at another place entirely, and being able to go once or twice per quarter on the train where there's internet on the train and you're not wasting your time behind the wheel. Instead, you're taking advantage of riding. There's some real opportunity here. So thank you for taking advantage of that and aiming for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And before we get into any board member reports, comments, or correspondence, I wanted to call to your attention that we received today, not today, but a couple of days ago, a memo regarding reopening in-person board meetings. So if you didn't get that, reach out to Anthony and he'll make sure you get a copy of that. It is anticipated that we will be back in person for September. So we will also have an agenda item on our agenda in next month in June to have the opportunity to discuss that if you have any concerns or questions, and so we will have that opportunity in June. So with that, are there any other board member reports, comments, or correspondence? Board Member Sanchez.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to recommend that we all get a copy of Robert's Rules or whatever we decide to be governed by, because, you know, I've been chair of attorneys, you know, and guess what? Attorneys love to debate. And I've been chair of on a very controversial issues. And while this was not like a big controversial issue, it did feel strange that we were unable to understand how to close debate, and also that there was a motion and a second for an amendment and it was not heard. So I think it's important for all of us to be on the same page. So to staff, if we can, you know, each get, you know, if it's Robert's Rules, which is something that I've been working with, I don't know, 20, 30 years, or whatever, because I know there are other things that we could do. I think it would be really great if we were all on the same page.
Well, I appreciate the feedback. I chair this meeting and I have chaired occasionally other meetings. The NCTD board in my 8+ years here has probably had 2 or 3 votes that were not unanimous, and it was very seldom there were no substitute motions. But you know, I inherited a book of Robert's Rules from my grandfather.
Yeah, it's just a
at my city
suggestion.
council office. I'll go pick it up. But in the meantime, you know, I do know that there is some flexibility that we can operate under the same set of rules. And if you want me to define rules, maybe we take that to an executive committee and see if we need to establish a written policy. But ultimately, it boils down to the fact that we've never had a situation quite like today. And so I did my best to let everybody be heard. We could have had vote after vote after vote, and I think it would have ended up where we ended up. So in the time, I think that we were successful in letting everybody be heard.
Well, that's a possibility, but to be denied, I mean, Robert's Rules is for the occasion that you do have a debate, not for every time that you have. I mean, you don't really use it. You don't really need to use it if everything is, you know, a complete agreement, right? So like, for example, I know how to handle amendments. Once a motion is made and a second is made, that motion no longer belongs to the maker of the motion. It belongs to the board, and it can't be, oh yeah, I'll go ahead and accept that, or I will deny that. It's actually belongs to the board. And if we all are on the same page, then we can do this quickly without having, because I think we spent more time, you know, arguing over what the rules were.
Well, how about you and I will get together in our free time and talk about coming up with a policy, and we'll establish something in writing, and that way we can share that with the board, and we'll all go in knowing we don't work that way at the city of Encinitas. When there's a substitute motion, there's a vote on the substitute motion. So I have seen Sandag does go with it's the ownership of the board. So, but we do work with a modified set of Robert's Rules orders. And, you know, I'm comfortable with whatever the will of the board is. If we want to have a written policy about how we handle substitute motions, so be it. But, you know, the substitute motion, it's the way we operate is, you know, voted on. And the only deviation that I had was I let everybody speak because it happened so quickly. But meanwhile, I don't know that, you know, this is the right time to debate this. So why don't we move on to
not a debate,
else
it's
who
just a
has
recommendation that we all get on the same page.
Chair Edson.
Thank you. So I attended the LoSAN board meeting, May board meeting, and I just wanted to share that LoSAN plans to restore service to pre-pandemic levels over the summer, which I know that NCTD is leaning toward too. So that's good news.
Thank you. Board Member Gasterlin.
Thank you. I have a remark and then a point of information. My remark builds on what Board Member Sanchez said. We could have gotten to a unanimous vote today by voting yes on $80,962 for topology mapping and right-of-way boundary. We could have done this as a board in steps, small steps, but clear steps forward. And I only ask that you treat Del Mar the same as you would treat your own jurisdiction.
We certainly did. And, you know, it's no time to redeliberate this.
I understand. I'm offering the remark. And now I have a point of information.
What you're saying is that as long as we went with the motions that you made, we could have been unanimous, but I don't think that was the will of the board. So at this point, you can go ahead and make your comment.
No, we had the potential to be unanimous. I'll say it that way. Behind me, you will see the railroad track as it's coming from the top of the screen from Solana Beach. So hi, Jewel, you're up, you're right about there. And it's coming straight south and then it takes a turn. Where it takes a turn is where it has to slow down as it's heading to the beach and the coast in Del Mar. And where I'm sitting right here is where the train would continue through the hill without bending toward the beach and the coastline, perhaps bending a little bit toward the hill. And directly underneath where I'm sitting is where there is a big bluff slide right along Jimmy Durante Road underneath a couple of homes. So that slide has since been repaired, but that's where there could be quite a significant amount of tunnel entry, construction, and reinforcement that would in fact be a benefit to the area. And it would continue through underneath the Del Mar Hill and come out on the other side at Portofino Road, just east of Portofino Road, perhaps going up and over Carmel Valley Road and then hooking into Los Penasquitos Lagoon. This is the high-speed alternative, and I wanted to give you all a visual so that you could see for yourselves where this train would be. We really have our eyes on this in Del Mar. We see it as a possibility. We see it as an opportunity, and we'd like to see it sooner rather than later. I know Chair Kranz would like, you know, he wants to manage expectations. I'm saying let's get it going. Let's get it done by 2030. 2035 may be more realistic, but by saying those years, we're saying, you know, let's do it. Let's cut off that 20 minutes from Oceanside to San Diego. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next scheduled meeting is June 17th, 2021 at 2 p.m. Thank you all. We are adjourned.
Thank you.